All right, all right. Welcome to this episode of the Victory Podcast, where we explore life, leadership, and journey. I'm your host, Bob Newman, and it's my honor and privilege today to have a friend and colleague and teammate, Jason Caldwell. Jason is an accomplished adventurer. He's crossed the Atlantic Ocean in a rowboat, not once, but twice. And he has recently competed in the Pacific row, where they set another world record. So Jason himself holds 3 world records. That's rowing the Atlantic, the Pacific, and then walking across Namibia. And I'm sure we'll get into each, if not all of those stories during today. He also has written a book called Navigating the Impossible: Build Extraordinary Teams and Shatter Expectations. It's a fantastic read. Highly recommend it. There will be things in the show notes. And then sometime in the near future, in 2022, we expect a release of a documentary series covering his 2 Atlantic crossings called Chasing. So, Jason, thanks so much for coming on board the show today. It's great to see you, my friend.
Yeah, you too, Bob. Thanks. That was an incredible introduction too. I feel like we're done here. You pretty much finished the whole podcast. So
I don't know.
I guess we can get into some details, but yeah,
Yeah, so
thanks for having me.
it's December 9th, and so what? You're about 7 or 8 weeks done with the Pacific Row.
A little bit more than that, but gosh, I don't even know because it feels like a dream now. But yeah, I'll say this: I'm back to my fighting weight.
That was kind of what you see. You're a mind reader. I was like, okay, how much weight did you lose, and do
Yeah,
you feel normal again now?
yeah. I think I lost about 30 pounds on this one. I lost 40 on the 2 in the Atlantic. So this one, not as much, but yeah, definitely lost a lot of weight and definitely put it back and then some because I all my discipline goes out the window when I get back to these things. So like I just
What's it like? I mean, you must live such a regimented style to prepare for these, and we'll get into a little bit of that. But what must it be like after being a 2-hour row, 2-hour rest period to try and get back to a normal sleep cycle? Did that take days or weeks to kind of get back to?
yeah, weeks I'd say for sure. I mean, the juxtaposition of my 2 worlds where I'm, an adventurer doing these big audacious rows, and then I'm also a family man, husband, and a father living in a small town and going to the farmers markets on Saturday. It's just it still baffles me sometimes. But yeah, getting back, you're dealing with tendonitis that bothers you at night, but you're also just dealing with this idea that I basically was sleep trained for a month of just 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 2 hours on, and then you get home and it's really difficult to plow through another 2 hours. So yeah, it's odd. And then when you're finally back to normal, you can't remember how you even got through it in the first place. So
Yeah, and I can only imagine it's probably like this beautiful harmony. I say beautiful, hopefully it is, of you like listening to your body, listening to your physician, and listening to your wife, right? Like you got all the inputs coming in.
well said, Bob. I've never heard it like that. Yeah, it's a complicated and beautiful dance. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I missed on the introduction is he is also the founder and CEO of a business development and leadership development company called Lat35. And while I'm fortunate to call Jason a colleague, is he is our only strategic partner at Victory Strategies, where we work together to implement some of these strategies that Jason's going to talk about today, as well as what you're familiar with Victory Strategies. So, Jason, I'm going to go right to the book real quick on part of the introduction, which, for a Navy SEAL to read a title that says "Quit Like a Winner," which is the name of the chapter, is pretty enticing. Like, okay, where's Jason going here? But we'll talk a little bit about why I really love this excerpt here. Every human has an undefined threshold for both suffering and sacrifice that they are unwilling to go past. We don't talk about it. We can't measure it on any objective standard, but it's there, and it's there for each of us. A noble quitter is someone who understands where that line is and learns to respect it. Quitting has gotten a bad name from people who are unaware or unwilling to define that threshold and therefore decide to stop trying before they ever hit it. There is no honor and reason in that sort of quitting. My adventures have taught me that while we all do have a threshold for suffering and sacrifice, it is usually much higher than we think. A person who would be capable of leading a high performance team takes the time to learn exactly where their line is. Because once you know it, you can tiptoe right up to the edge and actually go further than all the other people who flamed out a mile back because they couldn't imagine they could make it that far. The path to doing difficult things is not mindless enthusiasm. It is to learn about yourself. Learning about yourself is the only way to block out negativity, endure past adversity, and meet the goal that you've set. It means testing yourself. It means earning your own self-confidence and paying through hardship. Then you will have the right to say to your team, this is what we have to do. Quitting is not failure. Quitting is realizing that this one goal isn't right for you and your team. Failure, real failure, is never finding one that is. My path to success started the day I quit on something I'd wanted my entire life. That was the first step in a journey that would lead me to discover the process of finding my best goals, forging strong whys, and building exceptional teams and leading them to impossible successes. So, Jason, thanks so much for that. From a SEAL, it's so important because, our ethos is never quit. And we build an entire team and platoon concept about like, we will never let our teammates down and the mission first always. But guess what? I'm not going to send guys into a machine gun nest or expect them not to quit if their life is in jeopardy or whatever else. So it's like this monochrome does get, some bad gouge and bad press there. And I think you just so eloquently put it that like there is a time to make some assessments out there and pivot on what you might have set for a goal or realize whether that goal is really important. So thanks for sharing that perspective. I'd like to kind of hear your take a little bit deeper on that and then maybe pick up where that story ends.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this idea of quitting is, I think, it doesn't have to be as emotional as we have now, like you said, have created. It's not a mindless thing where it's a knee jerk reaction. I think quitting and the decision to stop something and to pursue other things um, can be a data driven decision. And I think that the people that are in tune with themselves, their goals, and the fact that there's opportunity cost with anything you do because there is a finite amount of time in your day and in your life. And so every time you spend time doing something, you are, whether you realize it or not, you are giving up that time for something else. So it can be a data driven thing. This idea, and I'll go into what, because because you didn't finish that excerpt, which is perfect because people don't know what I
I
quit.
don't know.
But before I even say that, I'll explain further this metrics that I use, which is this idea of suffering and sacrifice. And Bob, I'm going to use you as an example because you're a perfect example for this. If you and I decide that we are going to row an ocean together, it's going to be a two-person team, and we're going to do it together. We're both going to have to measure this idea of suffering and sacrifice. Now, the suffering portion is this idea of of physical suffering, but there's also going to be mental anguish, emotional anguish. Now, for me, because I've rowed 3 oceans before, my suffering won't be as great. I'm more trained up than you for these particular things. I'm a rower, you are not. The amount of training that it's going to take me to get to where we need to be isn't going to be long or as arduous as it will be for you, which is basically learning and adopting a brand new sport and then becoming elite at that sport. So the suffering that you're going to take on just to even get to the start line is going to be a lot more than me. So your threshold is going to have, you're going to reach it pretty quickly, whereas I'm going to have lots of room in there. And then that's not even talking about the row. I've been on the sea a lot, on these little rowboats. I own my boat. Therefore, my seasickness probably won't even be as bad as yours. My hands won't be as bad as yours. My tendonitis won't be as bad. I'll be able to do little things. I've got the little hacks on the boat. Even if I told you about them, that I'm going to be able to take on more efficiently than you will. And so then again, the suffering continues and you're going to be right up against it for the whole time, whereas I'm going to have a buffer. That's the suffering part. Now let's talk about the sacrifice part. Now the sacrifice part is different. It can be. That's based on where we are in our life. And just as I alluded to before, what am I going to have to give up in order to pursue this very long, audacious, and difficult goal, this campaign of rowing across an ocean? Now, for me, I'm married. I have a 2.5-year-old. I have a business to run. A lot of those things are same with you, but you're a little further down the line than me. So when we start to look at what we have to give up, I might not be willing at this point in my life to row another ocean and lose that time with my 2.5-year-old boy who will understand that I'm gone, but not understand why, which is a lot of guilt for me. Whereas you might be in a position that you are saying, I'm in a great spot in my life. My company is running well. It can be run without me. Everybody in my family understands I'm ready for this. And so therefore, our situations with the suffering or the sacrifice part might be switched. I might be right up against my threshold, whereas you've got a lot. So if we go both take this thing, and then right before we were about to push off, I say, I can't do this. I can't do this because my son got sick and he needs me there, or something like that happens. Everybody would think that if anyone was going to quit this campaign, it would have been you, Bob. It would have been you. It'd be the non-rower guy. But in this case, I hit my threshold, and my threshold wasn't for the suffering, it was for the sacrifice. I was unwilling to make this sacrifice, be gone from my family for months at a time while I've got a sick child at home, or something like that. Whereas you might have said, "Hey, everything is my, everything, all my ducks are in a row." And so I use that because those are the two things we're measuring. They're both very different but very real parameters that we have to know about ourselves. To simply, as I said in the book, just say quit because I don't want to do this anymore. That is, that's an insulting quit to people. That's where it gets its name, and its reputation. But if we truly know these thresholds for us, and by the way, those thresholds are constantly moving up and down based on where we are in our life, and we're making our decisions based on that data that we know about ourselves. Those are healthy quits, and that's how you'd quit like a winner.
Yeah, no, I mean, you just succinctly like wrap that up, and it's so tenable to everybody, no matter what your challenges are, whether it's in the personal space with your family or whether it's business, it's all relatable. And that self-awareness, as you and I know we agree on this for leadership, is so critical for you to be able to make those decisions. And I like that parallel, the relationship between suffering and sacrifice, because that sacrifice isn't just my sacrifice. You alluded to it. It's my family's sacrifice too. And
Oh,
I'm looking at the folded flag behind your head, and it reminds me of my retirement ceremony, when I presented each of my children a Purple Heart. I was wounded in 2007. I signed up for it. I put my name on the dotted line. I knew what the risks were. My kids didn't sign up for the lifestyle I led as a Navy
right.
SEAL. And like, to me, their sacrifice was way bigger than any sacrifice I made to be away from my family and all those things. And I think a lot of people could benefit from that in their personal and business lives if they're like looking at where that threshold is and they're self-aware in their environment and make those decisions for the holistic, right purposes and their goals. Really
Yeah,
good.
I mean, I think, on a different extent, certainly wasn't in the military and going to war like you were, but oftentimes our families are the ones kind of, holding that torch for us while we're gone, answering the tough questions to friends and family that don't understand why you re-upped, why, you left
Yeah.
if you didn't have to, why I'm doing these things when I don't have to. Questions like, why does Jason have to do a second row? Like, wasn't the first one hard enough as it is? And our families are already wrestling internally and in their hearts and in their minds with their own issues with dad and husbands being gone. Then they have to defend it, and that's a tough thing. And a lot of times people after reading my books have said like, hey, you're awesome, but I'll tell you what, who's the star of that show is your wife, because she's had to do these things. And I agree. So you're right, the sacrifice part is not just to you. Now, hey, if you're a single man or a woman and you don't have close friends or family, then yeah, maybe you've got all the room in the world for that sacrifice part just internally. But for most of us that choose to participate in life, it's not
Yeah.
going to be that way.
Yeah, and you talk about it in the book quite a bit, the why. And I combine the why with purpose and commitment. Like, that's kind of like my Venn diagram of all of what makes the why. It's like, what's the mission, what's the outcome, all those other things. And my back to your, the sacrifice and suffering, my purpose and why is driving those levels for me too. If my why is so strong and I believe in it so well, I'm willing to sacrifice more. I'm willing to suffer more to make that outcome a reality, right? And that is how we build those elite teams, as we sell that why, and that buy-in to all the people that we're working with. And then, if you do it correctly, you've built a team that nobody wants to let each other down. And I
Right.
know you talk about that in the book, in your stories, like rowing for the seat and all those other things. Just really
Yeah,
remarkable.
yeah, and they continue to answer that question why too, because we all know that we can sell a team of people such as ourselves on a great why, but using my analogy, halfway across an ocean, like you're not necessarily thinking about those same things that you were when you were
Mhm.
pushing off and you had all that adrenaline. And so you're constantly having to answer that why. And sometimes that answer is different. It changes. And when I found that the longer that you are with a team, the why becomes less about the outcome and the glory and more about each other. And that's where I think without being in the military myself, I think the parallels between these big adventure rows and what you've done and how you've served our country, there are a lot of similarities. I've had a lot of former military on my teams, and they are so about the people. You know,
Mhm.
it's the mission. And now that we've established this, we've committed. It is about the man, and I just love that. And you know, some of my closest teammates have been military for good reason. So
Yes, when you and I were first introduced, that was something that I absolutely like. I saw our alignment in that, like, you get it, and there are a lot of parallels, similarities, and cross paths, like things that overlap in your experience as a severe adventure racer, and the military too. So
yeah.
let's pick up the story where we left it off. Is like you had a why that was driving you all the way to Sonoma State. So like tell that part of the story for us, if you will, and then we'll kind of see where you ended up being this world class rower.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the why there, not to hold anyone in suspense any longer, was baseball. I grew up playing baseball. My dad was a ball player. You know, baseball was a huge part of our lives and just kind of, you know, the soundtrack of my life, of my childhood. I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. We were Giants fans. I mean, you know, at the house, oh, the Giants game was on, the radio for the game was on in the garage while we were tinkering around with things like we had season tickets to Candlestick Park, which was probably at the time the worst park in all of baseball. And, you know, and I loved every minute of it. And I grew up thinking and believing that I wanted to be a professional baseball player. And so went through the process, you know, was in Little League and then started going on traveling teams, did well in high school, then played in college at a small school in California, Sonoma State, and eventually played for the San Francisco Angels, which is a semi-pro team in the Bay Area. That is kind of, you play semi-pro in the off season if you're looking about getting potentially getting looked at to play pro. Here I am, though, in my going into my senior year, playing for the Angels, left-handed pitcher, tear the tendon in my elbow, need
Mm.
Tommy John surgery. A lot of people, baseball fans, would be familiar with that. You know, somewhat common. I mean, you know, they certainly talked about it as being like, "Yep, we'll get you next week to get the surgery." But the thing was, I was going to be in a brace like this for 6 months, then having to rehab for a year. All my letters that people that were looking at me, they fell off right away. I mean, they have, you know, there's just so much talent in the States for baseball. I was kind of getting there like, hey, get the surgery, get rehabbed, and then, you know, do an open tryout or something like that.
Sort
Anyway,
of start at the bottom again, so to
yeah,
speak,
it's
after
just,
recovery, right?
but to
Yeah.
be honest, you know, if I'm being completely honest, in that moment that I had this, I was sitting there when I was with my dad, and the doctor was reading my MRI scan and saying, "Yep, you tore the tendon, like pretty straightforward. It's Tommy John's." I I felt a sense of relief, like there at
Mm.
that moment, that I was like, I this is a big enough void and a big enough like chasm to that I can justify saying I don't want to do this. And I remember telling my dad that, you know, I was like, "Hey, look, I'm not going to get the surgery." And it wasn't at that moment. He said, "You know, the doctor said you only got a couple days to think about it because we got to put you on the schedule right away." And I remember calling my dad the next day saying, "I'm not going to get it." I remember him being upset and saying, "You know, I think you're making a mistake. Like this is your life's work. This is your passion and this is your love." And I didn't know it at the time, but I think what I realized later on was that it wasn't my passion. It wasn't my
Mm.
love. I loved my dad, and my dad loved baseball, and therefore I loved baseball. And that was the big thing, is that my dad and I were so close growing up, and it just made sense that this would be my life. But I had to take note about how relieved I felt that I got injured because the pressure was mounting. Anyway, I decide not to get it. The next fall, I go back to school for my senior year, and the rowing coach approaches me, and I didn't even know what rowing was at the time, Bob. Like I was just like I didn't know if it was whitewater rafting or kayaking. I didn't know, and says like, yeah, he heard about me and he said like, yeah, you should give rowing a shot. And I when I did, he convinced me. And a few weeks of going there as a team, I realized, yep, this is what love is. This is what passion is. I had missed it my whole life. It's like thinking you're in love with that girl that you date in high school, and then when you meet your wife or whatever, you know, you think, oh, wait a minute, no, that wasn't love. This is love. And I think
Mhm.
that's just really the kind of moment I had with rowing was this was the sport I was meant to do, and that's kind of how I got here.
So you were 21 when you tore that tendon?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Gosh,
I
yeah,
mean, so what an unbelievable insight, and I'll just phrase it as a gift. I
yeah,
suspect you look at it in that way too, and just from my own reflection, I had a phenomenal career in the SEAL teams, and I became a SEAL for many selfish reasons. One was to impress my father, make him proud of me, right? That
sure.
was definitely a component of me seeking to challenge myself in that way. And then late in my career, I started doing career development boards with my people semi-annually to help them kind of be groomed for the future that lay ahead of them. And while I was doing all this reflective work to help build future careers, I recognized that I lived someone else's journey my entire SEAL team. You know, I had leaders said, Bob, you're going to go do this next, and then you're going to do this. And it was great. And I appreciated all those mentors and leaders. But when I reflected back on it, I didn't really have any decisions to make for myself. I was kind of being led down this path. And so I strived while I was working with my crew to always give them many options so they didn't have this singular path to kind of follow. And for you to have that insight at like 21 years old and listen to your gut that said, I don't want to get this. Like it would have been easier for you to get the surgery, rehab, and stay on somebody else's path. But what a gift and a brilliant insight that you had that courage. I mean, that took a lot of courage. I'm sure to call your
Yeah,
dad and be like,
it
"Hey,
was
I am
a
not
tough
getting the
call.
surgery." I mean, and he eventually. I mean, he was hurt initially, but then he kind of got behind it, right? And
Yeah, yeah. You're right though. It was tough. And if we're going back to that suffering and sacrifice thing, it was this idea that I wasn't sure I was willing to sacrifice, 6 months in a brace on my senior year of college, and then rehabbing and basically saying that like forget your free time. Your free time will be around getting your arm back to the shape it needs to be. And I just didn't I think without knowing this idea of this threshold, I think I had reached it, I had surpassed it, and I was not willing to do it. And I am proud of myself. It was a difficult call to make my dad, and he didn't make it any easier because he said, "You're making the wrong choice. Call me back in an hour when you've thought it through." And by the way, my dad and I are very close to this day. He works at Lat 35 with me 2 days a week. We golf on Mondays. Like we're as close as can be, but that was a tough time, and I think that you know there's nothing wrong with trying to make your parents proud. And there's nothing wrong with parents living vicariously through their kids. Like this is emotional. This is raising kids at its most basic level. We did talk for a while, and I remember coming home in late September for my brother's birthday. He's younger. He was still in high school at the time, and we were having a barbecue with all the family. I came on and talked to my dad in a while, and I'd already been like a month and a half into rowing. I said, we're talking, we're cordial. And he says, how's it going out school? I said, it's good. Actually, I got into another sport. Oh yeah, what's that? I said, I got into rowing, and him just like me, he didn't know what the hell I was talking about. But, I said, I'm pretty good and I like it a lot, Dad. I do. And I remember him thinking like, hey, great, something to, a band-aid over a broken leg, so to speak, and it took him a long time to come around because I don't think he thought I was serious. And then when he realized I was, to his credit, he started bringing my brothers to the regattas and stuff, the ones that were close by, and then he eventually would, of course, travel around the country and even the world to go see me row. So he did come around, but it took a little while, and I understand that, and certainly we talked
yeah.
a lot. So.
Well, another thing that a takeaway I see here is the strength of your character, Jason, is that like your why must have been all about self-fulfillment, for the base. It wasn't about you making big dollars. It wasn't about you becoming famous because then, right, the default would have been easy. I'm going to go get the surgery, do the work and do it because my goal is being famous ball player. No, it was like you had this fulfillment prophecy that you want to live to. And you had this opportunity to create some space there and then find something else. And so what was it about the rowing crew and that team dynamic that drew you in? Because I suspect it's not the activity on the water, even though that's a fundamental part of it, but it's really that camaraderie I have to suspect and how the team is working together, right?
100%. Yeah, well, it's so true. Like, to be honest, I didn't fall in love with the sport right away. I go to this tryout that this coach had convinced me to go to against like my better judgment. I didn't want to go. And I went to it, and it was like, pardon my French, but it was a complete shit show. It was like 100 kids. And I'm like the oldest. I'm like a senior. These are incoming freshmen trying to find a place for themselves in the university. And there's way too many people and not enough equipment. The equipment is secondhand. I mean, it wasn't a boathouse, it was a boat yard. I mean, it's gravel,
Mm.
it's outdoors, there's shipping containers. That's what we had everything in. I got into a boat for all of 10 minutes. They're having me do push ups in the parking lot, run around and stuff. And I left it. Like, I left it. I'm never going to see this sport again. And this was a waste of my time. And I was pissed even that I even was convinced in a wasted a Saturday morning on this.
You
But
got
then,
hoodwinked by, it was Coach Mark, right?
yeah,
The blonde
and
haired, yeah,
I got to bring him up and I got to tell everybody what he was actually doing because on the surface,
brilliant.
yeah, but he was a brilliant, brilliant coach. But even before I say that, I go to the gym later on that day. I'm just at the rec center. I can't use the NC2A gym anymore at school. I have to use the rec center gym. So I'm there with all the other people. And this guy comes up to me and says, I think, weren't you at the rowing thing? I said, yeah, that was me. I was there. He goes, so was I. He asked me, he's like, what do you think? And I said, nah, it's not really for me. And he says, yeah, I wasn't that excited about it too, but like, I was thinking about giving it a good like shot, a good 1 week try or something like that. What do you think about maybe doing it together, carpooling? I'm like, this little shit. Like, it's like trying to bum a ride off me or something. Um, and but he did. There was something about him. Like I could see, when you're performing necessarily when you're an athlete or you're good, you can like kind of see some of you and somebody else you're talking to. Like there's a little bit of an edge to him, a little bit of a fire. He like
Mhm.
made really good eye contact, and I was just like, oh, something here with this kid. So anyway, I agreed. Let's go for a week. And what happened is 100 kids shrunk down almost immediately once practice started at 5 a.m. And the people that were left were a lot of me's. And we started kind of like talking to each other. We're now getting into boats more. And I'm starting to be like, oh, this is a beautiful sport. And I understand the beauty of it more now. But then I'm starting to talk to everybody. And I'm like talking to this guy, Mike, who came with me in the gym, who, by the way, was the best man at my wedding now. And
Oh,
yeah, and he was on the soccer team and blew out his knee, was just
oh,
running, cooling down laps around the field one day, and it just gave out on it. And he blew it out. And Coach Mark, who found me at the gym, had also found him. Another guy got cut from the basketball team, wasn't quite big enough. Mark found him, brought him on. Anyway, basically, what this coach did is he went to every single uh, coach of every single sport at the university and said, give me a list of the guys that you cut, of the guys that got injured. Anyway, I made obviously one of those lists. So he didn't bump into me at the gym like what I thought he did. He was recruiting me. He was
mhm.
he was stalking me just like he did with Mike and Scott and Big Mike and all these other guys that end up being this core thing. He was offering what you said earlier was he was offering us this why. He did not say it. By the way, Sonoma State rowing was abysmal. It had never won a race in the history of its entire creation. The baseball team drafted an average of 3 athletes a season into the pros. This sport, well, not only is not NC2A, they never even seen the finish line. And
Wow.
then we go and we have unprecedented success. We win 7 races in the spring alone, 7 regattas. We get invited to Stanford's Invitational because of that. We're starting to knock off all kinds of teams. And everyone wants to know, like, everyone was wondering, how the hell did Sonoma State go from this nobody to winning races and beating us? And I have to give credit to Mark. He understood. I am offering you to be part of something greater than yourself. And that's what I imagine the SEALs do, and they do it very, very well, maybe better than anybody in the world. Military organizations are so good at that. That's what Mark was doing. He's saying, I know the worst thing in the world is not losing or quitting or getting injured. It's no longer having that something greater to be part of. And he knew that I was desperate for it, even better than I knew it. And that's what he was offering. That's why I went to the tryout. That's why I went back, and because I was looking for it. When I finally found it, I was off to the races. So
Yeah, and that purpose is so palatable when you know it when you see it, and there's I don't know if it was your reference in the book, it was certainly a takeaway. Is you guys initially reviewing yourselves a little bit like the Island of Misfit Toys, sort of December 9th, Rudolph's Red-Nosed Reindeer should be playing sometime soon.
yeah,
But right, that Island of Misfit Toys, but that's not what it was at all. It was literally the coach was building this team because, he's applying a technique that I absolutely love, which, and I say it all the time, is like, I will take character over talent any day of the week. I'll
Yeah.
take someone who's got desire to drive and work together and all those other things well over talent. And what he's saying is like, yep, I can take the right people and I can teach them, which is not an easy skill. I know a little bit about crew because when I went to the Tuck Business School, I had 8 of the Canadian rowers from the Olympic team. You know, I
Yeah.
think I showed you the picture
And
where I'm
you that
built
picture.
based on the 6'6" giants and larger. But anyway, they taught us about the boat and the rowing and everything. And you said it, it's a beautiful sport. It is like, you're talking about fierce power and strength, but totally controlled with grace and precision and, working together so you don't damage the boat, while you're doing this row.
Yeah.
And I can't even imagine what it's like to be working at your limit, but making sure that you're staying on pace with everybody on that stroke rate. Just beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I love the other thing. The other kind of adjective that I would use is that idea of interdependency. It's like this idea that it's a house of cards, that you pull one guy out of this crew and like the whole thing falls apart, and you can't. I mean, everyone is depending on the other. And I love this idea. Initially, I didn't, but now I love it more than anything else, the sport of rowing, which is this idea that there's no superstar on the team. There's no LeBron James. You cross the finish line and you win that race, and you can't point to the one person that won it. Oh, well, this person had one hell of a race. That's why they did it. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you lose a race, you can't point to one person and say, that was why we lost the race. It's everybody. And coming from a very individual sport like baseball, which has a lot of great things about it, by the way, but I'm a pitcher. I mean, I'm about the most individual
Individualized
position
person on the
in,
field.
in one of the most individualized sports. I go to this sport of rowing where you have to like shed this individual ego for the collective ego. I'd be lying if I said that that was an easy thing for me to do. And even when I was in love with the team and in love with the sport, I was really struggling with this idea of, I'm working hard and I don't think you're working as hard. And therefore, I'm mad at you because I'm pulling harder than you. Instead of this idea, is like, that's not how you, just like no one can be singled out during a race, no one can be singled out on the team like that. Like if the team is slow, you own it just like everybody else. So if you can't get that guy to work harder, then you're failing just as much as he is. And that was a very hard concept for me to like really come to terms with.
Yeah. And so you get the Sonoma State, and I say you because you're the only one from the team I know, but your team gets to where you actually start winning races. You start podium on a regular basis, and like you had said earlier, Sonoma's, they've never even won or even like podiumed before. And now you've got the success behind you as a team. Was there like a key tipping point or ingredient where things started to happen and that belief in yourself as a team kind of started overriding some of the hurdles that you had to overcome?
There was a lot of there was many little tipping points that came. I think one of the biggest tipping points that again, giving Mark credit, another such a unorthodox way of coaching, but just such an interesting thing is there is a Stanford Invitational. Stanford being one of the best races or teams in the country. They hold an invitational. They're just down the road from us at Sonoma State. Mark had been inviting Stanford's entire crew to practice with us like every other week. And Stanford wanted to, because we have this one thing that Sonoma had was this beautiful long stretch of river that there was nobody on, weaving through the California wine country. So it's like gorgeous. So the Stanford coach is like, yeah, we'll put all our boats on a trailer every other week and send the team, and we would just get our ass kicked by them all the time. But then we'd switch people, and we'd mix the boats up. We get to row with Stanford guys. We get to talk to them, and I think at first they thought, "What the hell are we even doing this?" But I think there was some mutual respect there. But we get this invitation from Stanford to go, and their race is really interesting. It's a 2-day race, and it's dual racing only. You get matched up to row. So like, the U.S. Naval Academy is going against Princeton, and it's just Princeton and Navy going boom, boom. And the big schools will probably get 3 to 4 races in the weekend. We were offered one, one
Wow.
race. That was it, against another state school. that was certainly probably one of the better state schools in California, but not like an Ivy. But we got that one race, and so Mark had basically been the only reason he was really inviting them out there, besides introducing us to another level of rowing, was he wanted that damn invitation. And
Hmm.
when he got it, we got off the water for that practice, and he asked us. He said, "Next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend, Stanford's Invitational is taking place an hour down the road, and you've been invited, and you're going to get one row, one race, one 6-minute race." And he said this, "Do you want to go?" And I thought to myself, what the hell is this? Now I'm already kind of like, I'm on Team Mark because he did this kind of Jedi stuff with us already. But even this is like too much for me. It's too much. What kind of coach asks the team if they should participate in the sport or not? Like and I got mad and I said, well, like, are we even going to like who are we going? Is it you're going against Sac State? Well, I'm like, are they any good? They're like, yeah, they're real good. We've never beat them before. And I was thinking like, why are you asking us? Tell us what you should do. He's like, no, no, no. You have to decide. And I said, well, okay, I'm in. I don't know why we would even discuss this. We're rowing. And then, of course, everybody put in their time and everybody said they were in. But then I went to, because Mark worked at the university. And I went to his office later on that day and I was like, why are you doing that? Like, well, I don't understand. That showed weakness. And he said, I
Ooh.
said, do you not want us to row? Are you afraid we're going to get embarrassed? And he said, I want this more than any of you. I said, well, why didn't you just tell us that? I'm older for this team and I'm the oldest guy on the team and I'm about ready to graduate. And he said, because it has to be your decision. It has to be. You're going to see another level. I have not prepared you for what you're going to see. You have to want that. And I have to know that you want that. And so, again, Mark's credit, unbelievable leadership right there. And sometimes leadership is about getting out of the way and allowing this high performance team to have its own flow and you to not be, that part of that solution necessarily. And I just thought, what an amazing, and the guy continues to impress me to this day. I stay in contact with him, every month. So he's just an impressive man.
Yeah, leading through empowerment and trust is, in my opinion, the trait of a true visionary and leader. Um, and you guys had some incremental pieces with the Stanford coming to practice with you guys every other week, and that's like,
Yeah,
so your confidence going into this had to be at least pretty high because you had started closing the distance quite a bit with the Stanford team, even to the
we
point
did.
where you guys were, like neck and neck by the end of some of those.
Yeah, we'd steal a piece from them every now and then too, and
Yeah,
and because we definitely had our strengths. We were just ragtag, but we had our strengths, and I think this idea of this dual race really made us nervous though, because everybody is watching just these two boats, and it's just
yeah.
two lanes, and it's boom, and it's like the entire country of rowers is going to know. And again, to be fair, like maybe they're not watching ours very carefully, but like we had a chance to put our name up there somewhere, and so that was what made us nervous.
Can you quickly like take us to that scene because you said it's a tipping point. You guys are now racing, one on one on this arena. Like, what's the energy like leading up to you getting in the boat, you getting into position? What is all that like? And then kind of talk about the results real quick.
Well, I love it because I've got a picture framed. I'm gonna pull it up. This is awesome.
Yeah,
I've never done this
awesome.
before, but hold on one second. I'm gonna pull something off my wall here. So this is exactly that moment here on that row. Like this is me and Mike shaking hands moments before that race, that dual race that's on their water. And Mike had this habit of doing this thing that moments before we'd start, when we're all sitting here ready to go, locked and loaded, he'd turn around and say, look me in the eye, because he sat stroke seat, which is like the quarterback of the team. And I
Okay.
sat right behind him in seven, which would be like maybe the running back of the team. And we were responsible for setting that rhythm. And he'd do this thing which made me nervous, like, dude, turn around. But he like wouldn't let go of my hand until he saw in my eyes that I was ready to
Mm,
go. And so it started to become a thing. And we had already done a number of races by this time. So I was ready for it, which is why I'm staring. But he would not let me, like you can see this picture, like he would not let me let go of my hand until I showed him that I was ready. And that like emotional commitment to each other is just insane. And so, I'm even getting a little misty eyed just thinking about
goosebumps.
that. Yeah.
Goosebumps.
And
First goosebumps of the episode so far.
it's
Yeah, I love
awesome.
it.
So, and it's quiet because unlike most starts of any sports where everyone's getting pumped to kick off of a football game and the crowd is loud, At the start line, it's the most quiet. Everybody's at the finish line, a mile and a quarter down the road. And the start line, it's dead silent. It's the officials with their megaphone lining up the boats. It's the coxswain telling you to do this and that. It's a team making one last minute adjustments. So it's and the other team is right there. You know, they're right there. You can hear them talking. You can hear them whispering. You can look at the same guy who's in the same seat with you, and it's this beautiful, serene intensity that that Mike would love to play with, like right when you should be doing nothing but staring at the person's back in front of you, he'd turn around and almost just say, like, I asked me that he needed everything I had in this race, and damn it if I wasn't going to give it to him. So that's how it was.
That's remarkable. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
All right, so tell us, I mean, that race, how did it go, and then what came to you after that?
Well, we win, and we win by what they call open water, meaning that our boat was far enough ahead that there was open water between the stern of our boat and the bow of theirs, and it was decisive. It was a decisive victory, and there we for the first time we understand it's not the first race we won, but it's the first race that we thought we shouldn't win, and
Yeah.
and all of a sudden we're starting to understand that maybe there's something special here, and maybe Mark has got something, he knows something that we don't. And from then on, I think it was just 100% confidence in Mark's ability to lead this team. And all of a sudden you start to look at thinking, like, what if we win the next race? What if, I mean, my book is titled What If, because Mark kind of did this speech one time that said, what if we do this? What if you were to do this? Just take a moment to maybe even think of yourself. What if you were able to do that? When he would say that before that row at Stanford's Invitational, that what if was just seemed like a rah-rah speech. But now all of a sudden we were actually starting to ask ourselves that question. Like, what if we knocked off the next regatta and won that? Like, what would that look like for us? What would we need to do? And we'd ask Mark, like, what times do we need to achieve to be first in the next regatta? He's like, well, you're going to have to pull a 612 or better, like, as a team. Okay, what do we need to do in order to get that? Well, here it is. And it was this idea of asking, like, what if we were able to do that? And I think that was, I mean, obviously a big enough tipping point in my life and my career to name my book after. So
Yeah. And I love the little vignette during that race. I think you started reflecting on it in the book at like the 700-meter mark, or maybe the 1,000-meter mark. Like, where are they? And you've got the discipline to know. I want to know. I got goosebumps again thinking about like that energy of like, I want to know where we are in this race. But taking that millisecond pause to look over your shoulder could actually disrupt the flow that you guys are in, and you just don't do it. There's 200 meters left, there's 100 meter left.
yeah.
And then you could just tell by the way the crowd was moving right there, or the calmness came over, and you're like, we dusted them.
Yeah.
And just remarkable. And because everybody in your boat was thinking the same thing at the same time. And that's another attribute of this sport that I don't have any understanding of, but I can't imagine what it must be like to be giving it all of your effort and then really not knowing until the last second of actually where you are, if it's a close race, and just like moving.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
in
That's
most
what the coxswain's doing, right? The coxswain might be communicating some of
yeah,
that stuff to
he
you.
should be. But to be fair, he was so excited about where we were that, I mean, he's also experiencing something for the first time, which is, holy shit, we're winning, And I think, like, and also our coxswain from that year, Kua, is also still a dear friend of mine. But yeah, unlike most races where you're pointed ahead, when you're in first, because you're not looking at anybody. But because you're rowing backwards, you're going that way and you're facing this way. If your competition is even close to you, you can't see them, and you don't dare look out of the boat, as you pointed out, because you're not going to slow them down by looking at them, but you certainly could do something to your own mechanics that's going to slow you down. So there's that idea, and that don't look out of the boat, and folks, don't worry about that competition. Like, you can't slow them down, but you can affect how you're producing. So obviously I hit you over the head metaphor for building teams too, by the way.
Just for perspective too, about how many strokes in a 2,000-meter race for an 8-man crew?
About 230 to 240, 230 to 240 strokes.
Yeah, so for the audience, imagine executing between 230, 240 very complicated whole body movements flawlessly together.
Yeah.
Like, try and write your name exactly the same way twice, which you probably sign your name a few hundred times a year. Try and just do that exactly the same. And that's what these guys are doing with an oar, on the water. These perfectly balanced strokes together. This is really remarkable.
Yeah, the book Boys in the Boat, which was quite famous, a few years ago, it still is well known. He wasn't the guy who wrote that book wasn't a rower, but I think he's one of the best journalists to describe rowing. He said, imagine being having 230 strokes. Imagine a golfer that is going to hit a ball not at the exact same trajectory, the exact same distance, 260 times. That's what kind of
Yeah.
consistency. And then you add seven other people that all have to all hit that ball all at the same trajectory, then walk up to the next one and do it again 260 times. That's what you're looking at trying to do. Everyone hitting
And
the ball.
not relaxed power. It's like I've
Yeah,
rowed next to
max
people of
effort.
your caliber, and it's like the amount of power you guys are pushing out every second is like, it's just remarkable. It is like I fell in love with the sport. I've never even been able to be in a crew or a school or anything to that, but after being around a team and watching what they're able and capable of doing and how poised they are, and plus they're the most gentle giants I've ever met in my life. Some of the nicest
They
human
are.
beings ever.
They
Just
are. I'm probably
yeah.
like I'm like the enforcer of rowing. Like I'm the most like rough around the edges rower I think I've ever met.
Anyway, so you've got this accomplishment under your belt, and then something must have sparked, from I don't recall if Mark reached out to other teams. I suspect he was, but you got an invitation to head out east to Philadelphia to like one of the premier rowing clubs.
Yeah, that's what Mark does is he's just like that. He's so good. He's not afraid to go out. He basically called all of the biggest boathouses. I got a guy and he's special and he's, been rowing for 7 months and obviously no one
It must
called
have been
him.
like, oh, great.
Yeah, no
I
one called him back. And if
walk
he was
the
lucky enough to
floors.
get a hold of him, I think it was like a 60-second phone call. But ironically enough, like the best boathouse in the country, arguably Vesper Boat Club in Philadelphia, calls him back. McKeel Bartman just took the job a year ago, three-time Olympic medal winner in three separate Olympics for the Dutch. Won
That's right. Yeah.
two silvers and a gold. Retires after Athens at age 40 from the team and takes the head coaching position and moves out here into Philly to take the head coaching job at Vesper's elite team, which they take 16 of the top athletes and every summer, and of those athletes, a small handful of those get to stay around for the year-round team. And he said, "Yeah, we'll take Jason as the 16th guy." And I'm thinking to
Wow.
myself, like, first of all, I don't even know what I'm walking into. And I told Mark, like, what is this? Like, he's like, you have to get on a plane. I'm not joking. You have to get on a plane tomorrow after your graduation. You have to fly out there. I was like, well, I have an apartment. He's like, if you got to leave it all. Like, we'll take care of it. You have to go. You're already a week late.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, well, what is this thing? Like, he's like, oh, it's the best rowing club in the country, and this is a pipeline for the Olympics. I said, I can't possibly be good enough for this. Am I? He's like, oh no, like let me. He's like, let me be clear. I have not prepared you in the slightest for this, but you have an opportunity to do it. And again, he said, like, if you want it, you have to go now. And of course, I said, I'm going to go. And I remember I fly to Philly. I remember telling the cabbie, this is before Uber. I said, Boathouse Row. I mean, I didn't even know if that was a thing. He's like, yeah, sure. Boom, go down there. There's 12 old boathouses, 300-year-old mansions, and I'm just looking for number 8 on Boathouse Row, Vesper. I look at it, it's this gorgeous mansion, right out of a storybook, right on the river. I'm thinking to myself, I knock on that door, and that the first guy that opens it, because it was midday, so it was after morning practice, before evening practice. This 6'6" guy who like that, like those kinds of guys, opens the door, and I remember the first thing I saying is like, I am way, way out of my league. And I remember, like, I met with McKeel. He said, the guy was nice enough, showed me around a little bit. I'm seeing this trophy room, they got Olympic medals everywhere. I mean, this is like the history is so rich. I'm just thinking to myself, I'm being reckless now by taking a
Mm.
spot on this team. I'm going to be found out in about 2 seconds on this
I
first
was
practice.
going to ask about imposter syndrome. Like,
Yeah, that's what I'm
it
feeling.
wasn't even a term back then, but for sure.
I mean, I was thinking maybe I should just leave. Like, just go. Just get a hotel and then take a flight home the next day. But I stick it out. I meet with McKeel, and McKeel, this guy, and I'm like, why? I'm happy to be here, but I got to ask why. And he says, I heard about your baseball background, and I think somebody that had that type of discipline was able to get that far. And it turns out he loved baseball, having never played it himself. Some ex-pro from the States was in the Netherlands when he was in high school and took like batting practice or something like on like the soccer field at his high school. And he loved the sport, and he became a Boston Red Sox fan for whatever reason. Loved it and loved baseball. When he heard about me, he's like, I can turn this guy into a rower, and that's what he wanted to do. And so I got there, and obviously a lot of stories there. We don't have time for all of them, but essentially, I'll let you kind of decide what you want us to dive into. But I was thinking I was going to be pink slipped at any minute. Like even the first workout, I was just like, I'm out of my league, and this is going to wear thin. So
Yeah, but I get we do have to fast forward a little bit, so we're not going for 3 hours because we could. I mean, you have so many stories, and we'll definitely have you on the show again. But so like,
yeah,
so you work at Vesper, you train, discipline. McKeel's good on his word. You don't make the year-round team. You go back to Sonoma, like you go to masters, like literally, was it a master's in geology, right? My daughter Samantha would love to talk to you. She's studying environmental science at Dartmouth right now, and she absolutely
God,
loves
no,
rocks.
no,
So
no.
she might quiz you on all that stuff. And then you go back, but again, back to your character. You're like, okay, cool. I got some lumps. I learned some great stuff. I was exposed to an amazing environment. And then you go back and you rehone your skills. You double down on the rowing. And like, tell me about that decision process. I mean, it had to be humbling, a great experience, but also humbling. And that imposter syndrome, was it gone by the time you left Vesper
Yeah,
or?
yeah. It was because I started to understand what makes a rower fast. That's what I was learning. It was an education, and you nailed it. I go there, I make it through the summer. I don't make any of the top boats. I row a single most of the time, and I practice in the second eight, but I never get to actually race in it. McKeel says you had a great summer. You learned a lot. You got a lot faster. I'm going to get you into Penn, which is an Ivy League school, so that you can row on their team, which was next door, and I'll keep an eye on you. I'll give you extra workouts to do, and with your goal of coming back for next summers and trying to be even faster and maybe making the year-round team. But you have what it takes. So he gave me a lot of confidence. But I
Yeah.
told him I wanted to go back to Sonoma, and he says that is the dumbest thing you could possibly do. You go here. This is an Ivy. This is Division One
Yeah, it's
Ivy
Penn.
League.
I grew up in Southeastern PA. Like,
Yeah.
could you not go to Penn with an offer like that?
Well, yeah. Also, my stepmom was like, "You idiot! You could have gotten an Ivy League education." But I learned so much, and I wanted to tell. I journaled every day. I had a book this thick at the end of the summer of all the workouts, why we did them, how I did on them, and I was like, I've got to go back to Sonoma, and I owe this to them.
Wow.
And I wasn't the perfect teammate either that first year, and I had a chip on my shoulder, and I was tough on everybody, and I was an asshole to a lot of them. We were winning, and I used that as an excuse to keep doing what I was doing. But I met a guy at Vesper that summer, Don Wiper, never forget him. Went to Dartmouth. He made the team. Um, Obviously, not the biggest guy on the team. Oh, they're all bigger than me. At 6'4", I was the shortest guy on the team by far. But not he wasn't that big. He was probably 6'5". He didn't have the big, rowing scores, the big erg scores on the rowing machine like everyone else did. But he was the stroke seat of the top boat all summer, where Mike was for Sonoma, and no one could knock him off. And I just couldn't understand. I was like, how is this guy doing that? Like nobody could beat him in the seat races. Nobody could ever knock him off. He was faster on the water than anybody, and it didn't make sense to me. And what he would tell me, and I asked him, I finally just said, like, hell, I have nothing to lose. I'm not going to be on this team for very long, so I'm just going to try to soak up as much. And I asked him in the weight room one day, I said, how do you do it? Like, how do you win all the seat races all the time? Seat races are basically real quick. It's just how you find out who's fast on the water is you row two boats side by side for maybe 2 minutes straight. You measure the distance, and then you take one person in each seat, you switch them, you row it again, and you see the difference and what happens to the two boats. Now, everyone else who's not getting switched in that is called a control. You should row just as hard for one guy as you do for the other. But what everybody knows is that never happens because we're human beings. What Don would do is he said, everybody in this team loves me because I do extra workouts with a guy who needs it. I'll go out in the water for an extra session for a guy who needs it. I'll pick somebody up at a bar when he's been out and he shouldn't have been out in the first place, and I'll keep my mouth shut about it. When I switch into that seat for seat racing, everybody in that boat owes me something. I don't tell them they owe me, but they feel that they owe me. All I do is set the boat up and row nice and easy and not disrupt everything, and I let the 7 other guys win the race for me. And that blew my mind. Blew my mind. And I realized I was doing the exact opposite at Sonoma. People were scared of me. People didn't
Mm.
follow what I did because they respected me. They followed what I did because they were afraid if they didn't, I'd yell at them or worse. And I did feel that I owed Sonoma something back. I needed to give back. And that's why I decided to go back. And I did.
That lesson from Don, I mean, for all you listeners out there, like stomp your foot on the floor and write it down, because that is the number one leadership lesson right there.
Love it.
As a matter of fact, I just talked with a client about this last week, is that like in the military, it happens a lot. And I know it happens in the business world too, is we promote the performers, right? The people who perform the best, they get the next job, the promotion, whatever else, or the next highest rank in the military. And that'll build a culture, right, of like top performers, but not top leaders.
Right.
And the SEAL teams, I believe, we're pretty good at it. I won't say we're exceptionally good at it, but we're pretty good at not promoting the person who's just the best performer. We promote the best leaders, and those best leaders are the ones who create that love, that buy-in, that mutual respect, where people would run through burning buildings, with gunfire in order to save that team or continue to work. And that's the kind of love and comradeship. It's
Mm-hmm.
not always the best performer. Oftentimes the best performer is the one with a chip on their shoulder, or being, the J-hole that people
Yeah.
just don't necessarily have that same respect for. And so learning that lesson again at such a young age, and then going back to Sonoma State and applying it. I mean, what a beautiful, like a poetic nod that you've done, not just for your team and for Mark, and you're like paying it back too, which I really, really appreciate.
Yeah. Again, like I wouldn't say that like I had been able to articulate the way that we are right now, but I knew that I owed something,
Yeah.
and I wanted to go back to those boys. And I had not like necessarily considered going back at all until Mark called me and said, you actually have eligibility left over. But you gotta re-enroll because I just graduated. And the only thing with rolling admission was geology. So I took every class pass fail, and, which was amazing because, stress was off and I just go to class without any notes. I would just listen because I take classes that I wanted to take, and it was great.
Mhm.
But I was there to row, and I was there to. I remember giving that booklet to Mike afterwards. And I said, "This is what we have to do. This is what we have to do. This is the work that we don't know what work is. The volume that we were doing over there at Vesper was insane. And I realized like it was this idea of quantity time versus quality time. Everyone's all about, hey, got to have the best strokes. No, you just have to have a lot of them and get a lot of them in there. You just got to be
Yeah.
consistency. And so we did that. And it changed the entire dynamic of Sonoma State. And of course, Mark said, hey, I'm willing to take all this stuff into consideration. You just went to some place that I've never been to before. So let's look at this thing and let's dive into it. Let's create practices around it. So
Yeah, I love that. I just got to share the one vignette of like when Mark says, "I haven't prepared you for this," and you go to Vesper, because everything you had done up to that point were 7-minute workouts.
oh yeah.
So
He said no, like make no doubt about this. I am not even close to it. Like he was like, it was like, okay, should I even be going? He's like, yeah, you should go. But like, you're not ready. I mean, yeah, we had done like, I remember the first workout that was there, ironically, was an indoor workout that afternoon. I got there on the ergs inside this trophy room. You're in this beautiful trophy room with 300 years of like history and tradition in it. And you get the rowing machines down and they said, oh, this is going to be 3 by 20 minutes with 4 minutes of rest in between. I was like, that's impossible. I like wanted to go to McKeel, but like, I know I'm the new guy here, but that actually, you can't do that. That's impossible. I remember thinking like, I should just run out of here. I cannot I did finish it, you know, by a very narrow margin, and I was dying. I didn't let anyone know. And once I got out of the showers, I was just like, oh my God. And I remember there was a couple Dartmouth guys, and I didn't even have a place to stay, and they let me crash at their place. And I just remember being like, I don't even know how I'm going to get up for the next morning's practice, but we
Yeah,
do,
yeah.
we do,
Talk
we
about
did.
just launching out of your comfort zone and then making the best of it.
Yeah,
And then so then you find yourself, you have a successful season at Sonoma State. Again, you level up the team. You and Mike are so Mike was still on that team rowing because he
yeah,
was
he
younger
was
than you.
younger. Yeah, he was younger.
Yeah. And then, but you go back to Vesper, right?
Go
And
back.
so, yeah, and so you've made your own goals at this point of what you want to do, or is it Coach Mark and um, the Vesper kind of laying out these things for you? Because you set it an agenda to make national team. I think is that
Yeah,
is
to make the national team or to go to Olympic trials, one of those two things by the next Olympics, which I've got basically now after my second year at Sonoma, 2 years to do. You know, and at this point, I'm going to chase down this dream that's very new to me, but enough people are telling me that I might be able to make it, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, this is where I need to be, and I love this sport at this point, I go back to Vesper, and now now I've rowed a little bit. Now I understand. I've gotten some better scores. And I feel like I belong there. Like I deserve to be there, and that was a difference. But I spend the next 2 years, 2.5 years training there, getting ready for what would be potentially trying to make the national team or to make go to Olympic trials and win trials. Not knowing exactly what boat I would be in and who I'd be rowing with, but just I'm going to put my head down for these next 2 years and row. And the friends and the people that I met at Vesper were insane. I mean, think about this is now probably getting into like being a SEAL in the terms of the camaraderie because now we don't even have school to distract us. Like
yeah,
we are there to row. We row 2 times. We're on the water twice a day with a weight session between. Some of us have part-time jobs. That was it. You rowed Monday through Saturday, and then Sunday was off, and then you did it again. It was like a prison-like routine where and I lived at the boathouse. There was only 2 rooms up there. I was on the top floor. It was gorgeous. And we were a crew. I mean, we all had our bikes. No one had any cars. We would ride into town every night, get dinner, go out to the bars and cause a little bit of trouble and all that kind of stuff. And it was just this huge camaraderie. And here's the thing, and this is the 2 stories I'll tell to wrap up Vesper would be like this idea about Dawn was really sticking with me. And one of the things that I realized is, and it wasn't like macho or anything, but I realized, like you said, they are gentle giants. We go into the bar and you can imagine 12, 13 guys, all taller than me, 6'6" or whatever it is, going into a bar attracts a lot of attention. Some positive in Philly, though, some negative as well. The guys
oh
looking
yeah,
for trouble, and we would get into it sometimes, but none of the rowers wanted to get into it. But then I'd be the one always popping off, and I was the enforcer. And I realized that that was my way to earn the love and respect of this team. Is that it didn't happen all the time, but when someone needed to, I would be the guy to step in. And one particular time, and this is about a year and a half into it, we're all thick as thieves now. Big rule though: no fighting at Vesper, no fighting. And if you get caught, you're off the team. And that wasn't a big deal for most people because they would never do it anyway. But it was something I had to be careful of because I'm in my mid-20s, I'm hot-headed, and I'm protecting these boys because that's what I do. And it was paying off on the water. I went from the last spot on the second boat and I worked my way up into the top boat. And it was because of that Dawn thing that the guys loved. They wanted me in that boat. Jason, we are faster with Jason in that boat. And those were my brothers now. And one night it gets a little crazy and we get into some trouble and it got violent and it got bad. And after we got everyone got out of there safely, I was pretty messed up and my knuckle had been broken from obviously punching somebody. I'm not proud of it, certainly at this point, having a son and stuff like that, but these were the days. Bobby, I'm sure you had some of those times too. So,
Mhm.
but you can see the bone, and
With the same merit, I stepped in for my teammates.
there we
I
go.
was not a rabble rouser, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, I can see the bone in my knuckle. I'm like, well, I'm done. I'm off the team. I've got one day for this to heal, and it's bleeding. I wake up on Sunday morning. There's blood on the pillow. It's closing up. I have to wrap it. The next practice, this was in the winter, so the next practice was indoors on Monday, and I got it wrapped up. McKeel's going to see it right away. He's going to ask. I'm not going to lie. That's what happens. We get down the ergs, getting the ergs down. He says, Jason, what's going on with your hand? I told him, I said, this is it. This is what happened. I got into a fight. The other guys did not. I will say that I was protecting them, but I know I broke the rules. And he said, we'll talk after this practice. And I was like, well, this is my last practice. I want to make it count. After that practice, he pulls me aside and I tell him, and all the guys are walking up to the third floor to shower, and they're just like, you don't deserve this. This isn't fair. And I said, it is what it is, and it was like, the guys had my back, and they were saying little things to McKeel. McKeel's like, I'm talking to Jason. When I talk to him, we can talk to everyone else later. And I went to tell him about that. And the first thing he says is like, well, how did it happen? I said, well, this is how it worked. He's like, and then he started teaching me how to use people's weight against them to show them how to get them down. And I'm sitting there as he's telling me, he's like, okay, so come at me like he did. And then he's pulling me down, and he says, so you want to use their momentum? Because he took judo, and that was like what he did. And so afterwards, I'm like, I swear, I'm a little confused. I thought I was going to get to the team. He's like, we all know why you're on this team and what you mean to these boys. That's your job. And if that's your job, then you do it. But I need to make sure that you're protected when you do it. And I remember going upstairs, and they said, what happened? I said, yeah, he taught me how to fight. So, and it was just another amazing piece of leadership there from McKeel, because he understood his men so well on that team. He understood. He didn't have 16 rowers. He had 16 men, all with different backgrounds, and we were diverse in our own ways. And he embraced that diversity. He knew who I was on that team. He knew why I made those guys faster.
Yeah.
So.
I've been fortunate to work with a lot of the Dutch, and they are strategic, big picture thinkers, the ones that I reflect on. They look at whole pictures, and they're not transactional. And it's not in their culture. They're so like friendly and deep in their relationships.
He on the surface, like, you wouldn't think he was, because he was very serious about his sport, but he was one of the most emotionally intelligent men I've ever been around. So yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that story. So nationals, Olympics, those things sort of unravel, and where did you come up with the idea for rowing across the Atlantic? I mean, that's like, I've met a small portion of rowers, and one of them, Julian Bain, has rowed the Atlantic. His reason was he rowed the Olympics once, and he didn't make the Rio team. And he was like, kind of finding himself, like his identity was wrapped up in being an Olympian. And he was pissed off and says, I got to go do something. And he focused on the Atlantic. So what was it for you that had you driving towards that goal? I mean, what was the fastest crossing at the time? Was like 40 days or something like that? 35 days?
Yeah, for the Atlantic was 36 and some change. Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
I mean, that's like going out to row 5,000 meters.
No, certainly not. I mean, I'm not. There's some years that pass between when I finish at Vesper, and I don't qualify. I needed another round. And again, here I am stuck, and I'm saying, like, I did make an Olympic team. I'm not going to the Olympics. And I have a decision to make. Do I stick around? And McKeel's saying, stay around for another 4 years. Imagine what you could do in 4 years, how far you've come from someone who didn't know the sport. The last Olympics, you weren't even a rower yet. Now you were getting close. But I had to, I measured that sacrifice and suffering, and I found it wanting, and I did make the pivot, and I came home. And I enter into this area of intermission. I call it an intermission period. I think we talk about these ideas of, we know we have something else in us. We know we're going to do something else. We know we're not done, but we're in between chapters. We're in this intermission period where we need to recollect ourselves. And for some people, that can be as quick as a week or a weekend. Sometimes it takes months or even years. And you see these high performing actors and athletes and all these kinds of people that you go, where'd they go? And then they resurface and they do something amazing. And I don't know what they did, but I can guarantee you it was some kind of an intermission. That's what I was going through there. I started my company, and we started building this stuff out. And I just felt that there was something missing. I wasn't done. And I saw the opportunity with Lap 35, our company, as we started to grow, and we trying to continue to take market share away. And you hear a lot of these other people, and I know you get this, Bob, over there as well. You get these consulting firms and these other training companies that they've spent their entire careers studying this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Studies show this, surveys show that about leadership and building teams, but they have never been on the front lines, or they have never been in a boat. It's all theoretical to them, and people like us have spent our entire education experiencing, being on good teams, being on bad teams, making good decisions, making poor decisions, being led by great leaders and dysfunctional leaders, and everything in between. And that was what Lab 35 was really made of. And I was going to double down on that by saying, I'm going to go put our philosophy to practice. Now, to say that it was just about that is wrong, because there was a personal motivation there that I felt that there was this idea I had a wall full of silver medals, don't make baseball because I get injured. Get into rowing, then then don't qualify for the Olympics. Then we're constantly, I'm constantly just missing stuff. And so I'm this idea of this is kind of gnawing at me. And so I look for something and I find this transatlantic ocean race. I'm like thinking to myself, this is impossible. Like, I thought 3 by 20 minutes was impossible on the rowing machine. Now this is really impossible, because this was ridiculous. I mean, rowing across an ocean, I'm one of the country's strongest rowers at the time, and this still didn't seem like it was even possible. So that's what really started it. And it just like a little virus, it got in me, and it just would not go away. And I ended up becoming obsessed with it.
Yeah. So just a little time reference,
Yeah.
right? So you finished at Vesper. You founded Lat 35. Is it about 16 years ago now?
No, less than that, because I was working for another company that did something similar for that time while I was in Philly, and then I moved back. So it's been it's been like about a decade now.
Okay, so 10 years. So
Yeah.
you got Lat 35 working on applying your lessons learned from leadership from your life, but as well as really specifically from these two coaches that have made a huge impact on you, what you witnessed on those elite level rowers that have made that emotional leadership connection, which I love that term, emotional leadership. We talk about emotional intelligence all the time, but leading with emotion, as we've just been sharing, is so impactful. And then, so what year is it that you come up with the idea that, like, okay, I'm going to do this transatlantic row?
2013 is when it was, and I'm looking at this thing for the 2015 race. Everything I was reading was saying that you need about 2 years to properly prep for this campaign. And so that's what we're looking at. We're looking at that, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, you know, can this be done, and how is this going to be done? And like I said, it started getting into me, and I started thinking to myself, the first thing I got to do is build a team that's worthy of this goal. So that's kind of where we're at for that.
Yeah, and as a leader, how do you go about selecting, a team of it's four, right? You have four
Yeah,
people in that boat to do the transatlantic row, and it's got to be a pretty short list of people that might
yeah,
want to sign up for that. So,
yeah. So I mean, the first thing is I'm thinking to myself, who would even consider this? Now I've got a list of guys that I rode with in college and at Vesper, but as you can imagine, as I'm starting to make these calls with people, if we want to talk about sacrifice, the opportunity cost of, these guys have gotten into careers now and we've been married, started families. The opportunity cost, not just of rowing the thing, but training for the next 2 years was just too high. And that sacrifice piece for them, whether they look at it that way or not, was just, they were unwilling to do that. So, so I'm starting to really, it's a short list to say the least. And I'm checking people off it pretty quickly. And so the first person I get is this guy, Nick, who he wasn't at Vesper. He was at one of the other boat houses, and we had rowed against him all the time. And I had really respected him. He rowed at Temple, and then for undergrad, and then rowed at one of the other boat houses down the road. So I gotten to know him really well, and we respected each other a lot as competitors. And he was one of the most tenacious athletes. I mean, to be fair, he probably should have been at Vesper, but he decided for a smaller team. And so I gave him a call, and within a couple weeks of us going back and forth, he was in. So that was my first guy. So now we got half the team.
And so you build this team, you work remotely, like you have this training pipeline that you guys lay out there. You get the boats funded and all those other things. And you start the race and you talk about like I'd like to talk about this portion of the first race, and then we can kind of quickly transition to the other two. But like you talk about all this energy and positivity when you push off, like, man, this is awesome. We're going to crush it. And then all of a sudden current reality hits in. And that's the thing about long endurance events, right? Is the current reality is always changing.
Yeah.
And, our mindset has to adapt, but we've got to figure out, how can we apply and how can we overcome? And so walk us through sort of that race, because you guys had a really difficult time and you had to actually transition a couple of people during the race. But what was the time lag like from like, man, this is awesome, to like, man, this is really not awesome anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I built the team. We got Nick, who was like the kind of the guy I wanted, but then my other two teammates were a little different. They weren't Vesper guys or elite rowers. One was Greg, guy I'd known and worked with for a while. He's a good rower, but not necessarily a big one. But he was managing a boathouse in Houston at the time, teaching high school rowing, and you need a lot of utility. This transocean rowing race is not only very difficult, but you're talking about the logistics of the road. He was a problem solver, clever guy, and so we got him on the team. And then my last person was Tom, a guy that worked with me, close friend of mine, but not necessarily like the best rower by any means. Tall but skinny, had difficulty putting on muscle and all that kind of stuff. But the pool was thin, and he had really shown he was an immigrant from him and his family. His mom and younger brother had moved here from Azerbaijan in 2002. And his wife, I want to talk about that, for him was he wanted to be on the team because he wanted to represent the country that had given him and his family this opportunity. And when I heard that, I realized and he was the last to be recruited on the team. And quite frankly, I had never considered him. But after listening to it and really listening to his why, I realized, and there's a reason I'm telling you this, because obviously that comes into play at the end, but there is a difference between the best guys and the right guys. And I'd really been working hard to get the best guys. I wanted to be like I was at Vesper, this small guy on the team, but Tom on paper wasn't the best, but he's absolutely the right guy. And this why was so strong. And so he became that fourth and final teammate. So we go with this, we train hard. And again, we're separated in different cities around the country, but we get the funding, we do all this stuff for the next year and a half. And we push off, and almost immediately things kind of go bad for us. We have Nick, my first recruit, he's getting so seasick, and we're all getting seasick, but we're clearing it. And after about 3 days, not only he's not clearing, he's getting worse, and he's getting to a point where he can't even row his shifts. So we have 2 hours. You have two people are rowing and 2 people are resting. You got 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 24 hours a day throughout the entire crossing. And that's the rotation for whatever long it's going to take you to get those 3,000 miles. And so by day 3, he wasn't even rowing his shifts. He was in the cabin. He was so ill. He was getting sick. He couldn't even keep down water. And eventually on day 5, it got so bad that he was starting to convulse and shake. And he had salt sores all over his back as a result of being naked inside the cabin and laying down all day and being thrown around by the boat. He was in a real bad way, but he couldn't hold any medication down, couldn't hold any food or water down. And he was deteriorating. So we called the medics that were still at the start line, and they immediately said, we have to get him evacuated. We absolutely need to get him out of here. So what we had accomplished in 5 or 6 days was going to take them 2 days to get to us. So we were going to have to anchor and just wait.
Oh my gosh.
And so we're sitting here now 600 miles off the coast of Africa, having to anchor in this race that we are supposed to keep going on and on for 2 days. So there's a couple things. One is I know we're not going to win this race, which is devastating to me. Like, I don't mind saying it. I know I've got a sick person on board, and that priority goes to him, and I'm aware of that. But in the back of my mind, I'm also devastated that this is happening. I know I'm not going to leave this race, but we can't anchor for 2 days and then be one guy down and expect to win this race. So that's the one thing that's happened. But the other thing that happens is once we anchor, we tell Nick that this is what's going to happen, and they're going to get here in a couple days. Greg, my guy with utility, he says I'm going to quit I'm done with this thing. Like when this boat gets here, I'm leaving too. Like I'm over. Just straight up quitting.
Wow, just ripped my heart out of my chest.
Yeah, and to be fair, like him and I hadn't been getting along very much throughout this thing anyway. We all deal with the shock, the inevitable shock, as you can imagine, which is trying to wrap your mind around what you're actually doing, knowing that you haven't actually done the whole thing yet. And everyone was dealing with different, but he was really having a tough time with it mentally and emotionally, and he was getting scared. And so he saw an exit and decided he was going to take it. So here we are left with myself and Tom, and we're two guys in this boat, and Tom decides to stay. And there's an entire reason behind that. And I almost feel like we have to have part 2 of this interview because we have so much to go through. But long story short, he decides to stay, which was an amazing when it was an amazing gift that he gave to me, because he was scared too, and he didn't necessarily want to stay and be there, but he stayed for me, and that was an amazing thing. So when the evacuation boat got there and dramatically but safely got those 2 guys off our boat and onto theirs, and they headed to the Verde Islands, the closest landmass with a hospital, Tom and I are sitting here bobbing in this ocean with a boat that's too big for us, and and we're in third to last place at this point. We're 24th out of 26 teams. You can follow it on an app, and there's no way. Most people don't even think we're going to finish, let alone, we're going to have to quit eventually, let alone actually make any progress. And to make matters worse, about 3 days later, Hurricane Alex, which is heading from the Caribbean out, passes us north of us, and we're in the outskirts of which. So we're now in third to last place. We're down 2 men. Half our team is not there. We're being manhandled by a boat that's way too big for us. It was meant for 4 or 5 people, and we're with 2 now. And now the outskirts of a hurricane we're running into, which would be considered a tropical storm by our standards, but which is fine if you're driving to and from work or something like that, but certainly not on a 30-foot rowboat in the middle of the ocean. This is where we're starting to see these 20, 30, 40-foot waves that our 30-foot boat is surfing down. And for 3 days, we're just getting crushed. We're still rowing 2 hours on, 2 hours off. One of us is on deck by himself for 2 hours, rowing as hard as he can, while the other one's trying to get some rest inside this tiny coffin-like cabin. And every 2 hours, we would just see each other for a couple of minutes, talk, and then it would be that. And that's what was happening during this huge storm. And, at the end of this thing, kind of at the tail end of the storm out there, day 3, I've got the 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift, and, I'm at my wit's end. I want to quit too, if I'm being fair. Like, if we want to talk about our thresholds again, I feel I have surpassed my suffering threshold. I've got salt sores. I've got stress fractured rib. I'm so messed up, and so is Tom.
Stress fractured rib. So quickly, because we do have less than 30 minutes left for you, let's just let this go naturally, right? So you don't miss anything, and then we can reschedule when it's convenient to you. Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll just spice it in.
I don't want to.
Because this is great. This is gold stuff. And one is, I love our relationship anyway, but this is all great stuff. So I don't want you to have to shorthand any of the critical stuff, because you're building. I want your story to be able to build to, obviously the Pacific event, and then what you're doing with Lat 35 and everything else. I want to make sure we don't have to rest this.
Let's take us through this row with Tom, so I can describe what I learned, and then we can pick up the Atlantic and Pacific, my second Atlantic row, on our next one, if that's cool.
Perfect. Yep. So I'm at 123.20. You're getting into, you feel like you might want to quit.
Yeah. No, I do want to quit. I wish I would have gotten off that boat. And the more I wish I wouldn't have convinced Tom to stay on with me. Maybe I wish I didn't even convince him to be on the team, period. And we're both pretty bad. And he's in the cabin behind me. The door kind of creaks open, and I can hear him. And I've got 2 minutes left on my shift. I got my foul weather gear on. I'm dripped salt water. I mean, the waves are coming into the boat and just hitting you all night long. I mean, you're soaked and you're saturated with salt water, and the stress fracture ribs, by the way, is as a result of breathing hard and so expanding the ribs, but then pulling on the oar contracts them, and that opposing force will do a stress fracture rib. They're very painful, and so I've got all this stuff going on. Tom's got similar injuries, different things for him, and because we're kind of ships passing each other in the night, every 2 hours, the guy coming off shift would kind of offer like the data, right? Hey, keep it between 260, 262 degrees. Um, you know, uh, rain came on me. The first part of the shift should be clear. Here's a extra foul weather gear if you need it. I'll put it here under the foot stretcher. And the guy coming on shift would kind of offer these like words of encouragement and empathy. That's kind of just what we fell into, which was like this idea of like, hey, hang in there, great job, like go get some rest. And so that's kind of what I'm like looking forward to with Tom in this moment. And I'm just whatever he's going to say. I mean, I'm in my darkest hour, to say the least. But instead, Tom he goes, hey, well, what do you want for breakfast? And I thought to myself, like, what a inconsiderate comment this was. That's what my first moment was. I was like, I'm dying here. And this man has asked me he knows I need these words of encouragement and empathy. I need empathy right now. And he just asks so offhandedly, so insensitive, what I want for breakfast. And I'm about to like turn around and kind of like admonish him for this comment.
Because you would jump to the conclusion that, like, hey, you weak ass, it's time for you to row. I'm exhausted, and you just want to buy 10 more minutes of time.
Yeah,
of
I mean,
me
it's
rowing, right?
irrelevant, this question. Don't worry about what I want.
Relevant, yeah.
So, like, but then I like, before I say something I would regret later on, I'm sure. I consider the fact that I'm starving, like in the midst of this like night, this crazy night with all the storm going on, and it was, it's dark. People don't realize that half this row is taking place at night. You don't stop at night and sleep. You row through the night, and sometimes, yeah, it's a full moon, but more times than not, it's a new moon, or it's a cloudy night, or the moon hasn't even risen yet. And so, I realize like I'm starving. I'm like not eating anything. So I kind of go with it, and I just say, I guess I'd have the chicken risotto, which was my particular MRE that I liked,
Yeah.
which is 75% of our meals, our calories. And he kind of goes with it too and says like, I would have the spaghetti bolognese, which was his favorite. And he asked me follow up. He says, do you want me to make some coffee? And I'm thinking like, yeah, that'd be nice. That sounds good. And, he's like, do you want me to sprinkle that powdered hazelnut creamer in it? Because we had this stuff and I loved it. It was so good. I was like, yeah, what are we even talking about? It's my favorite part. And
Did you feel like you're being set up? I would feel like I'm
well,
being
I mean,
set up.
I'm not even really doing the math right now that he's not gonna be able to do this in the next 60 seconds. But like, I'm kind of just like talking, I mean, the brain fog is so real out there too. But he basically says, he comes clear and says like, if you wouldn't mind rowing an extra 10 minutes, which is like now becoming apparent, that's 10 minutes of his shift. I can make all this food, and so that you don't have to worry about it when you get off. You can just eat and try to get some sleep. Now, I'm considering this because I want off the oars, but one of the things that Tom and I know about each other is that like I hated the cooking aspect. I hated the jet boil, trying to, get the right amount of water. Don't spill it on you while the boat's getting thrown around. And so I'm like, I don't like doing that. I'd rather put the muscle into the oars. That's like always been my thing. Like I'd much rather just row, whereas he would rather cook. He was really emaciated at this point. He had probably lost less weight than me, only because he had less to lose.
Right.
And so I make the deal. I say, okay, and that's what happens. For the next 10 minutes, I row and he makes food. And then this, again, we've talked about these moments with Mark, or with my dad, even then with Mark at Sonoma, and then with McKeel at Vesper. And now here is this moment for this first row. Is we don't even talk about, there's no hope or agenda with this. Like he says the food is ready. I just pull the oars in. Now nobody's rowing at this point. We're not making progress. And I turn around in my seat just to face him. So he's sitting in the back seat. I'm sitting in the front. We're just facing each other. We're 6 feet apart. And he passes me the food. We just start eating. We just have breakfast together.
Together.
Yeah, together. It's just, we didn't think about what would the ramifications? No one's wrong. We just did it because his food was ready and my food was ready, and basically hadn't seen each other in 3 days. I mean, imagine not talking to someone for 3 days. I mean, that kind of seclusion is just killer. So we just kind of started sharing stories and what's been happening out there. And the flying fish was hitting me all the time. So I was telling about that. And, there's, and all this
Sure.
kind of stuff. It's brutal with the flying fish. But after 30 minutes or so, like, we're done. And we're like, okay, that's good. We go back to rowing, but this monumental shift, and if we want to talk about the tipping point, this is it for this row, is in this moment we go back to our rowing, but from that moment on, remember we're in third to last place. People don't think we're going to finish. We start going faster. Our daily mileage starts to tick up and up, and I don't mean just a little bit faster. I mean a lot faster. We are in third to last place, and over the next 41 days, we go from 24th place all the way up to 11th. In fact, we were in 10th place for a half a day, and we lost it at the very end to a four-person team. But for the next 41 days, we went fast, where we were getting sat phone calls and text messages from our land manager saying, you just passed 2 more boats overnight. You guys are now in 16th place. Keep on going. It was that. And the other thing that was happening is that every morning from that morning on, we always had breakfast. I rode a little longer. He made a little more. And we had that breakfast together. And sometimes it was nice, like that first morning where it was like the sun was kind of peeking out now. The storm was kind of, we're on the back end of it. Other times it was pouring down rain, just kind of shoveling food, but we never missed that breakfast. And if we want to go back to something that I said at the beginning of this podcast, which was that we were, the why can change. It certainly was changing now. For me to join that row, it was about this idea of, am I only good enough for second place? I need to prove to myself and everybody else that I'm not a wall full of silver medals. And this idea of personal glory, doing something that no one's ever done, that was what was keeping me on that boat up till this point. For Tom, it was the U.S., America gave my family and I a second chance, a better life. And I want to represent that country for the first time in a real way. But we are not thinking about this stuff anymore. Like, we're just not. Like, this is not a movie. Those breakfasts were a way of re-answering that question why, and that why was now about each other. It was to recommit to each other. We were recommitting every morning at 8 a.m., no matter what the hell happened in the last 24 hours. And there were some brutal days there. I was reminded when I sat next to Tom, 6 feet away, eating our breakfast, sharing stories. Sometimes we're talking about business. Sometimes it was about family. Sometimes it was just talking about movies or whatever it was. And I get down with that 30 minutes and I'd say to myself, that's right. That's who I'm rowing for right there. And it became about him. It came about each other. And, that was what I call a gathering point. It was an opportunity for us to realign, and we grabbed hold of that gathering point every morning at 8 a.m. And it was our North Star. And, when we finished and we did all these interviews, everybody wanted to know, they want to know how did you do this thing? How did you do this seemingly impossible thing? You guys finished and you passed a bunch of boats along the way. How did you do this? And, I think they wanted to hear something superhuman, or these guys, we didn't sleep or we just went, we just went 24 hours a day. That's not the truth. The truth was real. The truth was we were tired. We were broken. We were scared. We're scared of everything. But it was that breakfast. It was that recommitment to each other that was the entire difference. Before that first breakfast, scared of everything, scared of dying, scared of, scared of the next 2 hour shift. After that breakfast, more scared of letting each other down than we were of anything else. And that is, to me, if we're talking about my journey of self-actualization, which is essentially what we've been talking about, this period, this idea of leveraging human emotion, which I had been doing in different ways, and Mark did it to me, and Mike did it to me, and Don did it to me, and McKeel did it to me, and my teammates did it to me, and I was starting to do it, but I didn't understand the power of that until I saw firsthand what two men can do up against it all in the face of adversity. And I imagine for you, Bob, and for those, especially in the military, listening, and I know that's not everybody, but a good amount, that you're seeing yourself in this story. And I hope to God that you are, because this is the most powerful tool in my mind that we have as humans at our disposal. And I'll leave it at that.
100%. Love is the most powerful weapon at our disposal. And what
Absolutely.
we will do for the love of one of our brothers or sisters or whatever else is impossible. That's why in the SEAL teams, everything we do at a minimum is with a swim buddy,
Yeah.
because I can do 10x with a swim buddy of what I can do by myself.
Yeah.
It's an amazing metric, and you've captured that so well. And that portion where Tom likely didn't know what he was doing, but he knew what he was doing, about that, because he was listening to himself. And that was the question I was going to ask as you're folding up the story is if you could put your finger on, because I believe it probably wasn't just Tom's story that compelled you to say, hey, let's be on the team. I think if you were to really analyze the situation back, there's something in your gut talking to you or your heart talking to you that like, this is the guy who I know I'm going to be able to trust when the chips are down. There's something in that spirit. It connects in a way that we can't necessarily, our subconscious mind picks up on it. And that's why I talk about with clients all the time. Comes a time you've got to listen to your gut and
Yeah.
trust that more than you're going to trust the data and the empirical stuff that's coming into you.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, out of the three guys that I was that I was training with, I knew Tom the best. Like I said, like he was one of my close. He is one of my closest friends. He was in our wedding, for God's sakes. This is a man I can trust. And so when I'm hearing him and his why, I'm realizing like he has a strong why. And oh, by the way, like this is a person I feel very comfortable with. This is a person also who is already afraid to let me down. We are already afraid to let each other down. We work together at Lab 35. He's just in the next office over there. Like we had been working together for a long time, and we are afraid to let each other down. And when we do, it hurts, and it's an awful feeling. And being able to have that even before we started was nice to have. But boy, did I not understand to what degree you can have that, to what degree. And when you're talking about running into, you know, to enemy fire in the midst of almost, sure destruction and disaster, but doing it anyway. And that is only because of that kind of human leverage. That's only because of that love, and it's just an amazing, powerful tool.
Yeah, and then be able to reflect it back into what you're calling the gathering, and you layer those in throughout your book, which is just a great way. And I would inspire all leaders to take those moments to analyze what you've just gone through, address your current reality, and then see what those takeaways were so that you can move that North Star in the right place. We talk all the time that leaders are the ones that are setting that light on the horizon that everybody's rowing to, pun intended,
Yeah.
together. And sometimes that's got to move. Or if you get knocked off course, at least everybody knows where they're heading in that direction.
Yeah.
So yeah, really, really remarkable stuff. And we'll pick up with the conclusion of the Atlantic race, those takeaways, then we can build into the future races when I get you on next.
Yeah, yeah, we got to schedule that soon because now we've left everybody hanging. What happens next? So, but I mean, I really appreciate you diving into some of the kind of more of the foundational stuff with baseball, with my collegiate rowing, with Vesper. I do think that there's some meaningful lessons there, and it does help understand how I got to where I was. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we are back, and the last time I left you, Tom and I were just coming in from our 51-day crossing, having two of our teammates be evacuated 600 miles into this 3,000-mile race. So, just to kind of tie up the loose ends that is this race, one of the most significant things I think as we were coming in is the last couple days that we were starting to come in, and we knew our families were waiting for us, and our friends, and we were excited. But Tom was like overly excited. I would say he was almost giddy with excitement. And rightly so. He had done something that he never thought he could do. And so I think, I found myself though really kind of having to fake the same enthusiasm that he had. And I was a little, it was almost a little concerning to me. Why wasn't I as excited about this finish as he was? And I did. I saw myself almost acting a little bit, especially as we were coming in on the day where we could see land, and we could start that we were getting on the sat phone, and we could hear that everyone was waiting for us. And I think for me, for the first couple weeks afterwards, I was really trying to understand why. And I think the reason why I found out later on is that I think even in the back of my mind, I knew that I wasn't done.
I was
And
just that's what I was gonna guess, and, like, one is what an amazing, self-awareness aptitude you have to kind of key in on that. I myself have had similar instances. I would always call it anticlimactic, finish, or,
yeah,
like, I don't need the pomp and circumstance because it was the deed that mattered to me. But to have that kind of respect that, like, you knew, I was gonna ask, was it because you didn't complete the goal you had set out to, right? I mean, you obviously crossed the Atlantic, but it wasn't necessarily didn't go the way you wanted, so that's why you
yeah.
knew you weren't finished, right? And it's
Yeah, I kind of felt like I was really halfway done. And I think right as we were finishing, I couldn't even articulate the feeling. I didn't know why.
yeah.
And then I'd say like a week or so, like as we were kind of on the island and just enjoying ourselves and having like, a vacation, a holiday, I was starting to realize that, yes, this is coming from a place that I know I'm not finished. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to do this again. But then you get home, you start putting on the weight, my wife and I going out to dinner, telling the same stories over and over again. And I'm starting to realize, that the real reason is not because I'm not happy with what Tom and I accomplished. I was. I mean, the goal did change, and that's for sure. We wanted to win the race. We wanted to break a world record. We didn't do that. We took 11th place and didn't break any kinds of world records. But I think the thing that I couldn't really shake was this idea that although one of my teammates had to leave because he was ill, the other teammate left because he was just over it. He was done.
Mhm.
He quit. He straight up just quit. And it's easy to get down on that teammate. And believe me, I certainly was while we were finishing out the remaining 41 days. But as the leader and the captain and the skipper of this team, it really does fall on me. And I think that this was a sobering realization that I had in the weeks, after I got home, was that, it's nice to be the leader, the team captain. It's nice to wear the C on your chest and to get all of that glory for being that captain. But you also are responsible for when things don't go right. And I think this is what I'm starting to learn here at this part of the story is that I had an obligation, a burden, an opportunity, whatever you want to call it, it changes at different times, to convince this teammate, Greg, that he wanted to be part of our something greater, this thing that we created.
Right.
And everybody, we know this, everybody wants to feel part of something greater. That's why we join clubs and we join churches and we are in fraternities and that's what the military does such a great job of. As somebody who's not a military guy, but I can imagine you can feel, I mean, they do an amazing job of making you feel part of something greater, this higher purpose. Well, that's what we had to do. And that's what I needed to do. And I had failed to do it with Greg. And if I couldn't successfully make him feel part of our something greater, I needed to probably move him along. And there was probably a time before we even left, if I'm being very honest, when I realized, because there was a lot of, red flags before we even pushed off. It wasn't like Greg was just showing these signs out there. He was showing signs on land. He was reclusive and quiet, didn't want to talk with other teams and stuff like that. If I can't bring him to this place, I should have given him a plane ticket and just said, you know what, we've got this without you. But I didn't have the skill to bring him on board, nor did I have the courage to give him a plane ticket and say, we'll do it with three, because I didn't think it was possible. And so that was what really kind of stuck with me. And that was really what kind of was gnawing at me. So I went from this idea of I'm on the boat in the last couple of days with Tom, and I'm not sure why I'm not as excited.
Mhm.
Then I'm in Antigua for a week or so, and I realized, I think it's because I need to do this again. And then I get home, and the next couple of weeks I realize, and here's the why. And so that's really to sum that up.
Yeah, I mean, it's like and that is like post-traumatic growth, like in, that experiential concept there, beautifully executed and observed. And you have to give yourself some grace too, right? Like your team has some buy-in to that. But I like, you've given me a deeper appreciation. I mean, I always have appreciation for captains, team leaders specifically, because there's so many variables that are outside of your sphere of control, when you're running a team in that kind of environment. And, the fact of the matter is that when you're a captain, when you are the captain of a vessel, and let's just stick with the nautical terms, is like your entire crew is putting their faith in your hands that you are capable of getting them through the tough times. Because it's easy to be a captain when it's sunshiny out and the waters are flat and the navigation principles are straightforward. It's when things go chaotic and stuff breaks or the plan goes awry that captain has got to step in. And it reminds me of the times of what it must have been like for some of the old school transatlantic crossings, like people were really shopping for captains on who they could trust based on the previous successes they've had. So
Yeah, that's why mutiny occurred, you know?
yeah, and so you had this amazing, I mean, let's just recap quickly. The successes of what you and Tom accomplished was you had to sit adrift for a while. You literally anchored, got into dead last place in the event, if not second to last, right? And then
Mhm.
the two of you working together, and even I would say, based on what your expectations were on how the two-man shift was going to work, you even adopted that in a way that was, not necessarily the norm, and you still were able to gain so much ground. So even though you're, finishing at 11th place, so even though you might have had this sort of internal tension going on, you could not negate the fact that what you and Tom did was like otherworldly, so that at least gave you a high to come off on it. And I believe your tenacity and dedication to the fact that you already recognize I need to do this again. How was it for you recruiting the next team? In that example of your sense of ownership and all those other things. And what did you learn from that process as well?
Sure, and I appreciate you, giving me that grace because there was a lot of learning as well, and we did things right. And of course, the thing that I can't stop thinking about is this idea of this breakfast that we had and
Mm,
this leveraging of human emotion and how powerful it was. And I never felt it. I had felt it before at different times at Sonoma and at Vesper, and of course in other teams that I was on, but nothing, it was amplified because we're out in the middle of the ocean. It's so dramatic, and it was so long. So I'm just thinking about, what would be how powerful a team would be if it wasn't just me leveraging one other person like Tom and Tom in turn leveraging me, but that I was leveraging three other people, and those three people were leveraging me and their other teammates. And I thought like, wow, what could a team do if that emotion that was evoked through Tom and I in this kind of organic breakfast that we just started having, if we could somehow replicate that feeling, not the breakfast, but the emotion associated with it,
mhm,
what would we be capable of doing? And then I started to really think outside the box and thinking like, well, it's not just the people in the boat. I mean, you've got your team is your family, your wives and your girlfriends and your kids and your neighbors and your friends and your parents. All these people are also people that could have that kind of leverage, that human leverage of emotion with you while you're out there. So that's how I started building the team. To answer your question, is this idea that Tom was absolutely the right guy, and thank goodness that we accepted him on the team, even though on paper he probably wasn't the best.
mhm.
And so I started to really kind of look at the difference between, the best and the right guys and really start to be honest with myself of what's the right people. So that's how we started going for it. And the first person that I talked to in building this new team, and granted, like I've got now 9 months now that I've decided to do this, and I'm going to do it the very next row.
Mm,
I've got 9 months to put together and train a brand new team to do what our competition have been preparing for 2 years.
right.
So this is not it's not I've got all the time in the world. So the first person I talked to is a guy by the name of Angus Collins. Now Angus is a Brit. He rowed against us in this first row and they won the race. And they were him and his three other teammates were best friends growing up. And there's no doubt that that had a lot to do with their success, how much they loved and respected one another. And obviously, we didn't have a lot of that in our boat. Tom and I did, but we didn't have it with the others. And so he calls me because he heard that I was thinking about doing it again. And he says, I heard that he was actually, there was a team that wanted to pay him like 30,000 like British pounds to skipper, that just be the skipper, be the experience on the boat.
Wow.
And he said, like I'd be interested in rowing with you, Jay, if you're still looking for people. And I said, geez, Angus, I appreciate that, because we were competitors, but we also were friends. We became friends over the last 2 years that both our teams were training. He's in the UK, I was in the US, but we spent a lot of time communicating, and I really respected him. I said, well, I don't have that kind of money to pay you. And he said this. He said, right off it, he said, I'm more interested in making history than I am in making money.
I love that.
I do too. I always
Love
tell him,
that.
I
I get goosebumps.
I give him crap to this day. Like, I said, you had to have that written down somewhere, man. Come on, like people don't say stuff like
Tattooed on
that.
my side, man.
Yeah. Well, anyway, but that's what he said. And the thing is that like right there at that moment, I was like, you know what? This is a very unique opportunity for me. I'm getting a second chance here. I'm getting a real second chance. And we know that that just doesn't happen that much
Yeah.
today, in our world. And I'm getting a true one to build this team with the right people. And Angus is the right person, like this is, when people are starting to say things like that, so we keep going on. And so we know that, hey, we're going to be the two of us. Where can we go from here? And he says, I rode with a young guy in the Indian Ocean, because Angus rode the Indian Ocean a few years back. He said, his name is Alex Simpson. I'd give him a call if I were you. I said, yeah, what makes this guy so special? And I never forget, he says, this guy just shuts up and rows. And I said, okay, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah.
But basically, he said, just give him a call. Like, just let me know what you think. He's still a close friend of mine, but like, no hard feelings if you don't think he's the right guy for the team. So I give this guy a call, this kid. I mean, truly, he's 10 years my junior at this point. He's in his mid-20s.
Wow.
And I give him a call, and I mean, obviously our reputations precede us. So he knows about me. I know about him. But from the first minute I call, he's all about this process. Like, how are we going to do in the next 8 to 9 months what the other teams that we're competing against have been training for 2 years? Process, process, process. This was not a guy who was saying, this is how I would do it. He's saying, I want to be led.
Yeah.
He was saying, I'm completely comfortable with taking a strategy that is not mine, absorbing it as if it were, and passing it down to everybody else. And I thought, this is exactly the type of person we need, because between Angus and myself, we got two captains. I mean, he was the captain of his team. I'm the captain of Lat 35. We're already going to have some interesting dynamics with that.
Yeah.
Angus coming onto a team that he beat the year prior.
Amazing.
So having this process oriented, guy on the team that also has rowing experience, but says like, look, I am ready to be led, was a really, really pivotal part in building this team. And maybe we call them yes men or something like that in today's corporate world. And I think it gets a bad rap because we need people that can do that. We don't need 17 people in a team, all with 17 different agendas that all want to satiate their personal egos.
Yeah.
And Alex was such a guy that was all about this collective ego, and he was the third guy. So there we are. We've got 3 now. We're 3 for 4.
Yeah. Let me ask. So did you have an epiphany when Alex was asking you, like, how are you going to get us there? What's the process? Did you already have that process laid out, or you went, bing, man, this guy's putting me on my heels. He's setting the expectations of what he needs from me, what he expects from me. And now I feel more comfortable because now I know what I need to build. And when I build that, the rest of the team will kind of gel behind that. Was it that the latter kind of epiphany?
Yeah, the latter for sure. I mean, he did kind of knock me back on my heels a bit,
Don't you
because
love that though, as a leader?
yeah, it was sobering, it was refreshing, and it was convicting. I'm thinking about, this guy is only asking for one thing: a clearly defined mission.
Yeah.
That he can take as his own and pass it down to the rest of the team. And he was very, casual about things. Like, he doesn't need to make all these decisions, but he was not casual about it being clearly defined.
Yeah.
And that was something that, again, we're talking this whole interview, this whole story is all about my journey of self-actualization, and this is really where we're getting into a lot of the learning right now, is that every man that I'm meeting at this point is teaching me something different, so
Yeah, and be able to absorb that, phenomenal. Okay, so you got 3.
we're on a roll.
Yeah.
um but I am, of course, as I was the year prior, really struggling to find that fourth teammate. And I think a lot of people that were in the ocean rowing community that maybe we were looking at, maybe more, the ones in the UK, had seen the row that Tom and I did as an epic and utter failure, and that's how it was perceived by a lot of people. And I know it wasn't, and I know that there were parts that we didn't do well. That there is failure in it, but I'm looking at this as just we're continuing this story. We haven't finished it yet. And so a lot of people were thinking like this is a sinking ship, like, and I'm not interested in being on it.
Mm.
So I had to pivot a little bit, and the person that I eventually pivoted to was a guy who I rode with at Vesper named Matt Brown. Now Matt and I, he went to Yale, rode there, very very good rower. Then went to Vesper, rode with me there for a few years, and then got accepted um, to Oxford and rode at Oxford. So, in terms of rowing pedigree, you don't get much better than that. And he's bright as all hell. He's a very smart individual. But the most important thing out of all that is not his rowing pedigree, not his ability to solve problems. It was that he had just, because this is the summer now. We're talking about the summer of 2016, and the row is in December of that year. So we're down to 6 months or something like that. The most important thing is he had just tried to qualify for the Olympics in the men's single. That means you must be the fastest rower in the entire country, and he lost. He didn't
Mm.
qualify. And I realized, like with Greg, I've got a unique opportunity. It's not that he lost that he's upset about. It's that he no longer has that something greater than himself. He has been trying for the Olympics his entire career, from the time he was at Yale to Vesper, to Oxford, and now he goes to Olympic trials and he loses.
Yeah.
And now what? Where is he? He's like me at Sonoma State after my injury, and I know that all what I can do, like my coach Mark and at
Mhm.
Sonoma, is not promise him that we're going to break a world record, not promise him that we're going to even win the race, just promise him that he can feel that something again.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I called him, and he'll tell you this today if he was on this right now. He said, Jason didn't even have to finish his sentence. I was in. And I was, and boy, was he, And so, but he doesn't have any ocean rowing experience. We only got on the team that's never rowed an ocean before. So, I've got Angus and Alex a little concerned about that. And, Angus would always say Jason seemed to he put a lot of stock into the guys that he rode with on flat water rowing, but this isn't flat water rowing. So, we've got a guy who's committed, but, we all had, as you can imagine, we've all got these strengths and weaknesses that we're trying to kind of suss out a little bit. But that's the team. That's what we've got.
And so you've got this short period of time, from a SEAL team perspective, right? Like a lot of our confidence in being able to work together as teammates is sort of the crucible that we've went through. Basic underwater demolition SEAL training, gets touted by, the world's toughest military training and whatnot. But that crucible is part of our foundation. Like when I hop into a new platoon as a young operator, people aren't questioning my fortitude unless I give them some reason to, right? And that's like, man, that's like a game changer for any operator if you start getting a stigma of somebody who doesn't necessarily push through that adversity. So there's this high level of confidence that when you get thrown into an element and you get put against really difficult, challenging times, that you're all going to pull through as a team and no one's going to quit or turn around. So beyond the commitment of setting, the goal of crossing the Atlantic and getting everybody to work together as a team, is there like anything that you do to try and test people's, discipline and fortitude in that type of adversity that you would expect to have on a transatlantic, row?
Yeah, I mean, what we need to do is spend time together, and that's how I'm going to have to do it. We don't have much time. We've got 2 guys in the US and 2 guys in the UK. So, we're sitting here, and we need to be in it. we need to get in it. We need to get in a boat together, in a 30-foot boat together. We need to get them in the ocean, and we need to get tossed around by the waves and see how we relate to ourselves and to each other. I mean, that is, even to this day, the best thing that you can possibly do, because we know that I can give a really great interview if you know, and I can give, people that are being interviewed can do that. And every guy that wants to be on my team can tell me why he would be a great teammate. And even if you go and do a 1 day row, they can hide it. I mean, they can hide their fears. If you're just rowing around the San Francisco Bay, not going to get too much trouble, and you're going to be home from time for dinner.
Right.
We need to put ourselves in a situation where there didn't feel like there was an end. And that's what's difficult about the sport of ocean rowing is you can't fully emulate what it's going to be like out there. You're going to find out new things about yourself and your teammates once you're out there, and that is also some of the appeal. So
Yeah.
that's what is romantic about ocean rowing, is this idea that you don't truly you don't truly get to know your teammates and even yourself until you're out there. And that's probably the number one thing I'm most scared of when it comes to all these expeditions, to include the ones I'll do in the future, is that I'm always afraid I'm going to find something out about myself that I don't like. My teammates are going to see it too. And that's a very scary thing. I can imagine in the military too, that happens all the time, because when you're in a controlled environment, and of course I'm speculating here, and Bob, you can go ahead and
Yeah.
tell me if I'm full of it. But when you're in a controlled environment and you're in training, there is that feeling that, like, this isn't live ammunition. We are into a certain extent being theoretical, and you'll never know until bullets are whizzing by you and shrapnel is flying all around whether somebody is the person you thought they were.
Yeah, and so that was actually why I asked this question is, we're fortunate enough to have the resources in the SEAL teams that, like, I actually talked about this on an interview earlier this week, is, I called it overstress training. So, like, if I was training a unit, and I'm not the only one that did this in the SEAL teams, it was just one of my common approaches, is once that unit met the standard, which was a high standard on the regular, at that point, I'm like, okay, everybody's getting competent. They're showing their competencies, their skill sets, and they're feeling comfortable. Then I don't just ratchet it up that 4% to keep them in flow. I
Mhm,
overstress. And the
mhm,
analogy I give is from the Russian chess masters, which is like, if I were to train you in chess by blindfolding you and asking you to play 3 simultaneous games together, for like a 3-month period, and then I take that blindfold off after 3 months and you play a single game of chess, like, your level of awareness and your abilities are gonna be, like, magnified. And so
yeah,
that's what we would strive for. In every block of training, we would do at least 3 to 4 bouts of overstress, which means we're running them through a scenario we know they can't complete. They won't
mm,
complete the mission. They're gonna fail. People are gonna, be injured, material's gonna fail, their equipment's gonna not work. And what that does is you get to really see a high performing team and how they adapt to these. Oh my gosh, we don't fail at anything. And then all of a sudden you see, how are they problem solving? How are they communicating together? Is there someone who's a weak communicator in the team, or their ego
mm,
gets an override as a leader and they can't handle that sort of failure? And it's a great training technique to kind of gel teams together and then see if there's any fractures, in an organization as well. And I can imagine that would be incredibly difficult to replicate, in an open 30-foot boat. Cause I mean, I'm already thinking, like, what do? You take away the compass, like, it doesn't work. How are you going to navigate with break, one oar? So all these other little things that we would do in the SEAL teams that people think, oh, this is never going to happen. And the reality is when you do all these things that you think are never going to happen, and they still are able to darn near, if not complete the mission, now all of a sudden that level of competence and trust, all those things get escalated in a way. And when I've watched that happen in the SEAL teams, that's when the magic really happens. And teams after those events, they just fly through the rest of training. And I'm just curious if there's a way you could kind of implement that type of strategy in your training for those long-term endurance events.
yeah. I mean, I have in future teams. The problem with this team is that we've got such a little amount of time.
Yeah.
We're going to go over there one time to train. They're going to come over here one time to train. That is it. That's the time we're going to
And
spend.
how long were those training bouts when you guys were together?
3, 5 days.
Oh my
These are not.
gosh.
Yeah, they're small. We've all got businesses and jobs and stuff, and you know um, we're just it is we're all training individually, and this is a concern. But I think this idea that really helped us with this kind of limited time frame that we had as a team was this idea that we started to create a community. Anybody that wanted a job with this team, we gave them a job. You know, if like our neighbor wanted to be part of this narrative, we could give him a something to do, you know? And so whenever we were interviewed, we would ask, you know, we didn't want to be interviewed as individuals. We want to be interviewed as a team over a meal with the journalists there. We wanted them to understand so that when they left, they were part of that team. They said, damn it, I'm not supposed to attach myself to a team like this, but I do feel I love these guys' story.
Yeah, you got to push that
What I
love,
wanted
man.
yeah, I wanted to do exactly. I wanted to get back to the start line and feel that we didn't have one or just three people that were around, but hundreds of people that we were having to live up to. And that was kind of what we were creating. And there was this moment, and I want to jump into the row because actually the row really can be boiled down into the last part of it. But there was this moment that they were all in California here in my hometown, and we had been doing a couple of days of rowing, and this was our last time we were going to meet together as a team before we met at the start line in La Gomera. And we went out and we got a big table at a restaurant here in my town, big farm table, and anybody that wanted to come stop by can. And I mean, damn, the half the town came, you know, and all of our friends. And there was this moment I remember, and there's actually a couple pictures of that night, but there was this moment that I was just watching my teammates talk to my friends, my mom, you know, this, you know, Matt's talking to this, and it was just everyone was buzzing. And I just remember thinking, like, we've got something here. There's something special. And I remember that was a night that a lot of, not all of it, but a lot of pressure seemed to kind of just wash away a little bit. Because I remember Carlisle asking me, you know, who you know, sponsoring us again, you know, do you have the right team this time? And I said, I remember saying to them, if I don't have the right team, I'm not the right guy. And
Right.
that was my line because if this is this, I think it is.
Mhm.
And so if I'm wrong, then I'm just not the guy that can put teams together like this.
Yeah. But it sounds like you
So
had like that observation you have created that gut feeling, right? Like at that point you went, I get goosebumps again thinking about it because I've witnessed this too. And all of a sudden you can't put your finger on one or even six things, but you just know, yes, like this is
yeah,
going to, like, this is it. Like people are synergized. It's just the energy. You said it when you
yeah.
let it out. It was the energy was there. It was palatable. You could feel it. I love that.
Yeah, yeah, and so, you know, we get to the start line with that kind of confidence. The team continues to gel for the 2 weeks that we're at the start line. I just it's just such a difference, you know. And Tom's there, by the way, because he's managing. He's our land manager, and so it's just we're having fun, you know,
Yes.
at the start line. We're enjoying ourselves. We're swimming in the ocean. We're joking around. We're you know, it's just it feels right. And so, you know, 2 weeks after we report into the start line, we leave. And two things, kind of like the two things that we had in our first row, we have two things kind of go wrong for us in our second as well. And so and those two things are one is very similar is we've got a guy who's seasick again. I mean, we're all seasick, but not the way that Matt is. So our one guy that hasn't rowed an ocean before is starting to show the same kind of symptoms that Nick was. And he's missing shifts now. He's throwing up all the time. I'm thinking, like, you gotta be kidding me. And of course, now I've got Angus and Alex kind of looking at me like, man, we told you so, you know?
Mm.
And they didn't say it, you know, and maybe they didn't even really look at me that way, but I feel like they are, you know. And and the other thing that was happening was that Angus and I now, you know, Angus and I had rode this before. We just rode it last year. We're one of like 10 people in the history of this race to ever do it a second time. Most of those people are because they failed the first time. And so they're trying to redo it. So we're kind of experts. And so we had talked a lot in the weeks leading up, months leading up. We were going to go south right out the gates. So instead of going west, like all the other teams, we're going to go south because kind of you know the history of the tides and the current show that like if you go south which is about 45 miles out of your way you're going to get picked up on this nice current. You're going to be buzzing. And so Angus is the navigator on this team. And so he's the ultimate decision maker with regards to this. And so we go south and there ain't nothing there. We got wind coming from the side. We got waves coming from the side. It's slow, it's wet, it's miserable, and it's just aggravating the seasickness of Matt.
Yeah.
So here we are, the most experienced team that has ever rowed this race by far. Everyone thinks we're going to win just by the fact that we've got all this experience. And here we are sitting in the first few days of this race. We're not even in first place, let alone forget about being on pace for world record. Like that's gone at this point. And we are just sitting there. But here's the first turning point that I see. Here's the first place where we kind of are diverting from the first year. Not a single bad word was spoken on that boat. There was no finger pointing. There was no, Angus, why did you take us down this way? There was like, Jason, I told you we can't take a guy who hadn't had, a lot of experience on the ocean. None of that. It was just, what are we going to do in this situation? We said, look, we're still the fastest team. Let's go back up to the competition and let's mirror what they do.
So you guys vectored. So you guys had rowed out of your way and then you recorrected and vectored back to kind of get online with them. Wow.
What a waste. So we do that. And so now, we're going back up and I'll forget, like, Matt's sick. And I remember saying, I'm going to take another shift from you. And Angus was taking shifts. And finally it was like, we can't take any more shifts. We're beat up now. We can't row anymore. And I remember opening that cabin door, the same one that Nick was in. And I just remember saying to him, and he'd say this too. I just said, I need you to go out there now. It's time. Do you think you can do it? And I just remember him saying, "We'll see." His face was on the floor there of the cabin, and he just looked up and said, "We'll see." But damn it, if that guy didn't get up and do it, he was puking the whole time.
God.
And he did it. And he eventually, over the next couple of days, cleared it and got back to himself, but he was still weak. So we're talking the first, week or so of this thing, we're just not in good shape and we're not in first place. So, but we get back in, we get into a nice rhythm. Matt gets stronger. We're all kind of humming. The 2 on 2 off is working well for us. We're starting to pass our competition. I think it was Christmas Eve, because I've got a picture up here of the team that was ahead of us at the time because they were great guys. It was Christmas Eve, I think, was the night that we passed them, and it overtook first place. And because this starts in early December, so we pass them, and everything's humming, and we're moving, and we're on, and all of a sudden, we can start to say, like, maybe that world record isn't within grasp. I mean, every day we're chipping away at that average, and we're looking like maybe we can come and get it. Until finally, about a week before we're supposed to finish, we're 24 hours ahead of the world record pace.
What?
And I mean, yeah, and we have chipped away. We are in first place. We're probably 3 days ahead of the second place team at this point, and we're on track to break the world record by 24 hours, based on my loose calculations. If you can look at it, that far out,
Yeah.
and the team's buzzing, and we're happy, and everybody's loving life. But the ocean's just not going to let you. It's not going to be that easy, and we get hit by a storm. We see that it's coming. Angus gets out of the cabin one day, says it's coming. There's a storm. It's going to smack us. And it's going to start as a lull, meaning there's going to be almost nothing. And that's going to slow us down a lot. And then we're going to start getting headwinds or northerlies that are going to push us south, which we don't want either.
Mm.
And I said, well, how long, is it going to be? He's like, I don't know, maybe a couple days. And that's a long time. You're hoping it's going to be maybe for a morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is, by the way, this sums up this entire row. But because I want to hear what your response is to this, Bob. But the storm hits us, it knocks us big time. We go down to we can barely hold a half a knot, which you can crawl on your hands and knees.
That's swimming.
Yeah. That is extremely slow. And finally, we have to do it. We have to pull out the anchor, and we have to anchor because we're in jeopardy of getting pushed backwards at this point. and the wind is swirling. You can tell we're like right in the middle of it because the wind is hitting this side of your face, and all of a sudden you can feel it hitting the back of your head. It was shifting and swirling, and it was just awful. And we pull out the pair anchor. We hadn't had to use it yet. We have to. We pull it out. We anchor. We're depressed. You just can't sit and anchor. You're watching it go away.
Yeah.
You're just watching the time slip by, and this is it.
And so I just want to interrupt real quick. I think I understand, you're in the middle of the ocean. So when you say pair anchor for our listeners, it's like you're setting a big ocean parachute out, right? And so that's going to help prevent the wind from pushing you further back. I mean, it's still going to push you back, but not nearly as much. But however, if the current's going against you, then you're really screwed at that point, right?
Yeah,
It's more
exactly.
stable in the water and is keeping you from drifting more than you would because of the wind. Is the primary wind.
It's a huge parachute that goes under the water, fills up with water, and acts as a drag. So if you're being pushed back by the wind, it's fighting that.
Right.
But you're right. If you're in a current, then everything is moving to include the parachute itself. So we anchor to hold as best we can. We only anchor for a little bit, but between that and how slow we were going the day before, once we pull on the anchor, we're still not going very fast, but at least we can make forward progress. It's letting go of us, but very slowly. And now I've got to do the math. I got to figure out what the implications of the last 2 days were. And by the way, this happened on Friday the 13th. I mean, I was not superstitious until
I
was like, are you kidding me? But I go into the cabin. I've got the little chart plotter out there, and I'm calculating, and it becomes really, really easy math. It was almost too easy. We've got almost, it's exactly 400 miles to go, almost to the mile from where we are to the finish line. And we've got almost to the hour, exactly 5 days until the expiration of the world record, which means we've got to do 80-mile days for the next 4 days or 5 days.
And how much did you guys, I mean, you didn't give us, in the previous row, you were giving us some metrics to what you guys were accomplishing. What were you accomplishing on the front side before you guys had to stop? Were you exceeding 80 days or 80 knot days before then?
I'll tell you what. So 80 miles a day. So here's 70 miles a day is world record pace. You can break the world record if you average 70 miles.
Okay.
75 miles a day is a very, very strong day. You were loving life. And 80 miles a day is, we had only done 2 up to this point.
Okay.
And we're on day 30 at this point. And out of the entire row, we had only done 2 80-mile days. And now we're being asked to string 5 in a row. I mean, it just doesn't
and
seem
those 2
possible.
could have you had favorable conditions and all those other things. Like everything's got to be lined up for you guys to be able to do this. It is.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And so, like, I'll be honest, like I'm crying a little bit in the cabin. I'm feeling sorry for myself, and I'm feeling sorry for the team. And I just don't think that we deserve this. We did everything right. And, so I compose myself and I come out of the cabin, and the guys are waiting for me. Angus is rowing, and behind him, Matt is rowing. And then Alex pops his head out of the cabin on the other side to listen to what I say. And I tell him the thing. I says, this is what we've got. We've got this. And I tell him that we got 80-mile days to do for the next 5 days if we want a shot. But here we go. Here's the response. The response is how I knew I'd achieved what I'd come back the second year to do. When I tell him this, what seems impossible to do, the first person that responds is Matt. And he goes, "Oh my God, thank God. I thought you were going to say 100. He's just so relieved that it's only 80 miles a day. And I remember letting him explain that, because that seems a little weird. But he's like, this team can do 80 miles a day. And I was just like, the genuine relief that the metrics had fallen within the confidence that he had of this team was just something that I didn't expect to get as a response.
Yeah.
And the next person, which was behind him, was Alex, the young kid, to process. He said, "I'll do whatever it takes, Skip." He's referring to me, the skipper. "I'll row all night if I have to." And the reason he said that is because he had trouble at night rowing. Those were his hardest hours, because he was so tired. And sometimes you literally just black out on the oars and fall asleep. And you're rowing, all of a sudden you feel heavy. And he literally just slump over. He was so sleep deprived. what he was letting me and his other two teammates know was that even those worst hours, he wrote every single one of them if that's what it was going to take.
Yeah.
And then Angus, who had won the race before last year but had fallen short of the world record, he says, we joined teams, or we joined together because we want a shot at a world record. It's not a great one, but it's ours. And I just thought, like, that response from those three, again, if we want to talk about what we learned, here I am crying in the cabin because,
And then your belief, right? Like those three
yeah,
responses, because it wasn't what
they
you
elevated
expected, they elevated you. Exactly. Like, man, you've given me so many goosebumps just on the second iterations here.
I mean,
Because I know it.
I talk
I
about
felt it
stuff.
when those people, because they're telling you they believe in you. This doesn't have
Yeah,
to do
and,
about
and,
the
and they
oars. It
believe
doesn't
in
have to
this
do about the
team.
conditions. It's that they believe in you. And there's no better compliment you can get as a leader is when those people in the face of adversity or things that seem impossible, be like, yeah, we got this. This is what you want. Yep, we're there because we're all here for the same reason. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it was so. Again, I've used this word already today, but I'll use it again. It was so convicting, because I'm in the cabin crying because I've already gone past oh, can we do it? No, we can't. And that's too bad for us.
Mm,
Whereas I get met with a bunch of guys that haven't even gone past the we can't do it yet. They're on the we can do it.
yeah.
So, I get on this train and I say, well, okay, if this is the case, we need to row three up because you row two on, two off, but there's a third rowing seat that is reserved. You can get it three people rowing at once if you need it. If the weather should necessitate that you need more power, it's a tool that you can use. It's an option for you. But instead of doing 2 hours two on, 2 hours off with three people rotating, you're doing 2 hours of rowing and only 40 minutes of resting. So now all of a sudden you're getting a 12-hour rowing day becomes an 18-hour rowing day.
Wow.
So I'm saying this is now a 5-day race for us, right? This is all boiled down to 5 days, 80 miles a day for 5 days to crush the 400 miles. And so I say for at least the first day, we have to do it because it hadn't quite let go of us yet.
Yeah.
And so for the first day, that's exactly what we do. We row three up, 2 hours on, 40 minutes off, 2 hours on, 40 minutes on, off for 24 hours. And at the end of that first day, we do 79 miles, which is good, but you're like, man, for everything that we put into it. And I mean, we're already beat up, we're emaciated beyond recognition, and you just like we gave it everything that we had right there, and we are we're a mile shy of this average that we need. And on day two, now it's really let us go. We don't have great conditions, but we have favorable conditions. Like we're not fighting anything. But on day two, when I think anybody who's listening to this would say you're justified in taking your foot off the gas just a
Absolutely.
bit. And like you don't even have to tell people. You might not even they might not even notice. But
Subconsciously.
I've just got yeah, but you might just like kind of say, I'm not gonna pull as hard as I was yesterday because I still have 4 more days to endure. And so, right, I can tell you that nobody on this team did because on day two, we did 94 miles.
Yeah.
And on day three, we did 92 miles. And on day four, we did 88 miles. So for the next 3 days after that, we crushed all kinds of we exceeded the average by more than we had, and nobody and the thing was is that when we were talking, nobody talked about the world record. That was the funny part. It like ceased to become about the world record. Everyone was just, how can I help the next guy be his strongest self? Can I make food for everybody? Jay, your heel is infected. Like you need to change that bandage. I put some fresh stuff out for you in the cabin. These kinds of things these were the kinds of conversations that were happening throughout those days. And I'll be honest with you, like the sun was going down. We had 24 hours before the world record. We had like 55 miles we had to do. We knew we were going to do it. The weather had really filled in and pushing us. We stopped the boat. We had saved a flask of whiskey just in case we had something to celebrate. We pulled that thing out. And we all had a nice. Everyone toasted. Everyone grabbed the flask and said something, about what this race meant to them. And two things that I noticed on those speeches. One is that everybody on the team gave all of the credit to everybody
Mm-hmm.
else. They never, when I saw Angus do this, or when I saw Alex do that, and no one said me or an I. And the second thing that I noticed is that everyone had seen this race in a completely different way. I mean, for four guys that are sharing a 30-foot boat over 35 days, you would think that we'd all have the similar recollections of the things that mattered and the things that made us do what we did. And everyone had a different story. To the point like I forgot about that day, And but Alex said, no, that day meant something to me.
Yeah.
That's what I got out of this, and it was amazing. And I think that's what's so cool.
What an important takeaway, because we all are mirrors, right? We're mirrors to those around us, and we don't get to perceive our impact to them unless we give them the opportunity to share, right? And so when you hear from those things, it lets us know that like our actions, our words, all that stuff matters much more. And I talk about this, some of my coaching is like, you know, you have the internal you and the external you. And, when you have a great understanding of your internal you don't necessarily need to care about how it is broadcasting externally, right? But the impact that we have externally is like 1000x of our internal focus, if that makes
Oh,
sense, right?
sure. Oh,
And
it
so when
does.
people are like trusting each other and they can share in that vulnerability is so impactful. And, you just reminded me of what we did when we finished the race across America. One of my good buddies and old teammates, Monty Heath, what he had us do is, we had 28 people from the crew and the riders. But the final day, after we got everything cleaned up and we debriefed the race, we had actually kind of finished our celebrations that morning. Everything was cleaned up. Is everybody, each one of the 28 people had a sheet of paper with their name written on it. We passed that around, and every person wrote an attribute that they appreciated from the person on the team. So at the end, when you got the sheet back, you had 27 comments from your teammates on reflections that were all unique on how you impacted the team. And I thought, what a wonderful exercise. And that's something that we would continue to replicate through, our workings with building elite teams and having those aspects. And you guys got that opportunity through your flask of whiskey out there.
Yeah,
And man, it feels good, doesn't it? And I,
amazing.
and so, man, it,
I mean, I would
I
also
just wish I was there to kind of see that energy of like just amazingness. And now, is this caught on video at all? Is any of the stuff in some of the, because I know there's a couple of
Yeah,
documentaries
there
we'll have
is.
in there.
There is. And there's a documentary coming out. It's being sold right now. It'll be on one of the major platforms, and of course, we'll let all of your listeners and followers know when it does come out where they can watch it. And there is a shot of it. You can see us as toasting
Mm,
because it got shot because it was on a GoPro. You know that those don't pick up sound really well when you're close, but the scene is there. You'll see the scene, and you'll see the flask, and you'll see the smiling faces. You won't hear what I just told you, which is why we're doing this
yeah.
podcast. But like that was what was being said, and that was for me what was being observed. And I think if you flip it around too, as terms of what you were alluding to, which is that what we perceive and what we think we're putting out there is not necessarily what we are. Certainly, a small fraction of that is that I think I'm a big reader. You see my books there, but Leo Tolstoy, Russian author, said human beings are such that no two men having shared the same experience will see it in the same way
Yep.
ever. And that's like that's a very good thing for us to remember, is that we are all the heroes of our stories. We that's just how it is. We're living our lives, and we believe we're front and center, whether we are or not. And sometimes we need to understand that we're playing supporting roles. And for this one, we were all for. It was an equal. It was an equal. We were all equally responsible for that success. There was no superstar. This interdependency, and I think it really helped for us to kind of see it that way. Is that there was no superstar, and it made it's a nice feeling to know that you are just one of a few instead of the only.
Yeah. And you have those key ingredients, right? Unity of purpose, you know, everybody on the team having such a level of buy-in that it's a team first mentality, the belief in your abilities as individuals on the team, right? That high level of confidence, and then the belief in the leaders, because it wasn't just you, right? You had four leaders out there, really, but between you know you,
Yeah,
you and Angus, like that's just
Yeah.
a great formula for success. And that plays in that, what I've been talking about recently is the placebo effect. Is like, the placebo effect has been proven through the medicine trials, right? But people don't
Yeah.
recognize that you can apply that in your life practice by
Oh, for
believing in
sure.
yourself and believing in the people around you. And then that causalities and the choices you make that are aligned with those beliefs are going to give you success. It seems so simple, but so few people actually put that into their practice. They end up listening to the negative mindset that reels in there. And so,
Well, yeah, exactly right. I mean, we focus so much on talent, and we are. I think there's, as a team leader, there's kind of two ways to look at the team that you are given. I mean, these days, I would say that at least with the clients that I work with, I mean, very few people are able to handpick their teams
yeah,
with complete autonomy. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. You're given an assignment and you're given people. And so, yeah, maybe you have a little bit of say of who you're going to choose for certain roles, but you don't have that much of autonomy. And I didn't, by the way, on my teams either. Like, I didn't have an infinite pool of people to choose from. I got Matt and Alex and Angus because they were the ones that were there, ready to step forward. So I think as a leader, you can look at it in two ways. You can say, "Gosh, I need to get rid of this person. I need to move this person in this spot. I need to do this." You can think of it that way, or you can say, "I've got everything I need right here with
mhm,
this group of people. I've got it all,
yep,
and now it's up to me to be able to leverage this pool of talent in a way that's gonna, is gonna equal success for what we're doing." And I think it's easy to get obsessed with talent. I don't have enough talent. Oh my gosh, you have enough talent. Believe me, I don't even know your team. You do.
yeah.
So that's
No, and I love that's a great lesson too. We're brought up in a society in Western civilization, like the standard quote is, how strong is the chain? Well, it's as strong as its weakest link. Total false. It's like
oh,
it's false, and like I can't believe you still hear coaches teaching that today. Or business leaders or whatnot, and it's like, man, one is you're not setting people up for success, if because then once you cut that that weakest link away, well, then everybody else is going like, well, am I the next weakest link? It's like a
yeah,
whole way
yeah,
to run an
exactly.
organization. And like this lesson I learned from one of my teammates, Adam Brown. He was killed in action in 2010. Um, his book is I don't promote SEAL books at all, and his book was written after he died. It's called Fearless, by Eric Blem. And his story is he came into the SEAL teams after having an addiction to crack. He grew up in Arkansas and he had a drug habit, and he had a family friend that was in captain in the Navy that helped him, after he got clean, get him enlisted in the Navy. Long story short is what I learned from Adam was when you were in his inner circle as a friend and teammate, he would share with you like, "Hey Bob, if I'm acting goofy or not being accountable or doing the things I'm supposed to do, I need you to call me out on my bullshit. And here's my past, right? Because I still struggle with my addiction or whatnot." And that
Mm,
lesson for me was pure love and appreciation for your teammate. And that vulnerability was so important because what Adam was sharing was his weakness so that I could be his teammate and help build up and bolster his weakness when he was at a time of vulnerability or whatnot. And that made the entire team stronger because it builds that trust. And then when we do that in an organization, we have that level of trust and we're willing to share our weaknesses with one another, and we can build up and help reinforce where there's gaps in our team. Man, you're just talking about that high potential and performance just goes through the roof because it's no longer about the individual or the talent. It is about the team, that this one element that's going to be performing together. And you guys hit that like big time. Because what I was going to say is like when you had that 79-mile day, I believe you might have been like, "Oh, we didn't make it." I believe the rest of your teammates, if not you, said, "We got this." And they went into the next shift being like, "This is totally attainable." And it's like you guys repeated Roger Bannister on the water, so to speak, right? Like when he broke that 4-minute mile, what happened? It was just like months later, everybody
floodgates.
else, the floodgates open. Now all of a sudden,
Yeah,
your team witnessed that in like, man, we're going to do better. And you just can, we can do
yeah,
this. We can do this. And the next thing you know, you only 51 miles to go with plenty of time
yeah.
behind you.
Yeah, no, well said. And I think, it's funny because I think as we keep talking about and kind of going through this story, we're pulling out a lot of the similar themes, this idea of interdependency, this idea of building trust, this idea of the collective ego. I think that these are all, when we go back to leadership philosophies, because that's what we're talking a lot about, is that there's a lot of similarities, and that's why you're nodding your head when you hear this stuff, because you're seeing your own stories in what I'm saying. And there is not one way to lead. There's not a way to lead people. There are many ways, but there are a lot of these common themes. And I think that how you get to them is up to you, and that's what makes your personal leadership journey so exciting. But we're all saying the same stuff, which I love, because
Yeah.
it's getting very clear in my head too.
Yeah. And that's as I've I'm passionate about leadership. It's why, I'm part of Victory Strategies. And as my team, as we work together on how we're going to be developing processes and whatnot for our clients. And I've been studying Joe Campbell, recently. He's the one that came up with the oh my gosh, why am I escaping me? Your journey, right? The hero's journey, so to speak. And I've seen, just as you're talking about, you can kind of construct, that leadership journey, if you will, the ingredients that are involved in like consistent success and messaging and things of that nature to kind of walk people through that path that may not be familiar with it. So yeah, when you and I had first met, you talked not so much, but your background and how you use the metaphor of the boat for team camaraderie. And now hearing these stories, it's so crystal clear to me, the
Hmm.
power of that, the engine that you've created there. It really is something very unique to kind of get people to work together on that level. Um,
Yeah,
so you guys, you crossed that finish line, you broke the world record by how many hours?
something like 13.
Yeah.
Yeah,
With
yeah. I
all
mean,
that, with all that behind you. So like,
yeah,
I know the team guy in me would have been like, man, we're doing this again next year because we broke it with 13 hours with all this bad stuff that happened. Matt, you're not going to get seasick next year and we're going to beat this thing by 24. Did you guys entertain any of that? Or you're like, woo, awesome stuff. What's next?
yeah. We all went in separate ways. We spent a few days together in Antigua at the finish line with our friends and family, and that was nice. And then we went our separate ways. We didn't all get together again until, so this was in January when we finished. We didn't get together again until I think it was May, when about we were all in London to the awards ceremony, and we were presented with our Guinness World Record. And so it was just interesting to see how everybody had like gone back to their lives. It's very difficult sometimes to reinsert yourself into your everyday life after having this incredible experience. And I know that from my friends that have been in the military, especially those that have gone into combat, um, there's a sense of loneliness sometimes when you come back, because you don't feel that you can talk to anybody that wasn't in that boat and have them truly understand what you went through. And so we all kind of experienced that, and we all came back. And of course, I had already known by that time that the Pacific was on my radar. I want to row the Pacific. I live in San Francisco Bay Area. It's my backyard. The race is from San Francisco to Hawaii. I want to do it. I want to break the world record and own world records in both those. And everyone had different reasons. We obviously shared it, and Angus was in. Angus is a guy who probably is happiest when he's out on the water. I would say he looks the most uncomfortable when he's like fully dressed and indoors.
Yeah.
but
God bless.
but
Like that.
so he was in. But Matt, well, I'll talk about Alex. He had a career. He's young, but he was working. Still is. In London, and he couldn't take the time to do another row at that time. That was his thing right there. He'd done 2 rows now at that point, the Indian and the Atlantic, and so that was his reason. And Matt, I've never seen a guy with so much closure in my life. He had no interest in doing anything else. And by the way, he lived in San Francisco at the time, so he was in my area. I took him out to coffee a couple times, trying to convince him when I was trying to put the Pacific team together. And he just said, Jay, I'm done. Like, I did it. That's what I needed, and that was his closure. And it was, I don't know if I'll ever have what he has in terms of that feeling. And I envy that. And no false bravado or anything, just from him to say, you gave me an opportunity to find my closure, and I thank you for that. And for that same reason that I thank you and love you for that, I'm also going to tell you, no, I'm not going to row anything else. I'm done. And he has been to this day. He's got 2 kids. Well, he was already married with one of his kids. They got another one now. They live in Texas, and he's happy as can be.
Those people
And
that know how and
God
when to
bless
say
him.
no, God bless them.
Yeah,
I'm still
exactly.
1 years old. I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so that was a nice closure, and we're all still very close. And yeah, I mean, it was the pinnacle. I think even to this day, those 5 days were the pinnacle of my athletic career. So that's for sure.
Yeah, very cool. And so, how? What year was that? That was what, 2016?
We finished in 2017.
17. Okay, yeah.
2017. Yeah,
All right.
yeah. It started in 2016 December, and we finished in January
Okay.
2017.
And so when you start, you already know you're going to do the Pacific because it's in your backyard. Did you give yourself the 2 year planning and execution of that race?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, you know that I did a desert trek that we're not unfortunately gonna be able to talk about today, but hopefully that'll
Yeah,
be another one I can be invited to
100%.
talk to talk about my trek in Africa and Namibia. So that was in the middle there, and then in 2018 I started the campaign for the Pacific. The second half of 2018 to do the Pacific in 2020, and so yep, gave myself the full 2 years, recruited the team, lessons learned, continuing to learn more things, and we get to 2020 with our full contingency of our team, and we had to pull the plug because of COVID. So that's why I just did it this year. So
Oh, yeah.
um, yeah, so 2 year campaign became a 3 year campaign, and of course, a lot of things, a lot of problems that happened as a result of that. One of our teammates that was on the 2020 team had to bow out because him and his wife were planning to have their first child,
Mm.
so he couldn't be in it. So we had to quickly recruit somebody else. We had a guy for a little while, then he fell out, and then we had to recruit another person, Jordan, who ended up being the guy who was on the boat. Did a fantastic job, but um, you know, the Pacific is of course its own story and its own beast. Um, but I think, you know, without just talking more about ocean rowing and,
Yeah.
really kind of just saying the same things, I would say that I'd pull one thing out of this row. Now, I'll just tell you right now, we did the row. We left on May 31st of this year, and we got in on June 30th in
Unbelievable.
Hawaii and broke the world record by 9 days. Absolutely smashed it to pieces.
That's
Um, and on the surface, incredibly successful, but it certainly didn't feel that way throughout the planning process of this year leading up to the row with COVID complications. All three of my teammates coming from the UK, Angus being one of them, then Duncan and Jordan, and then having to quarantine for 2 weeks, then get out to California, having problems with our boat the whole time. That led to a lot of stress, talk about putting ourselves in a situation that you don't want to be in right before you push off. Boat's not ready. We're underfunded. We're having to, I'm swiping and maxing out all my cards because we've got last minute big payments, just trying to get this stuff done. And so it just, and I hadn't even met one of my teammates, Jordan, who had come on late, hadn't even met him until he gets to San Francisco, and all that stuff. I'll give you one. I want to give one example because we are talking about leading teams, and I think that this was probably one of the most successful things that we did in the months leading up. Once Jordan, our final teammate, became a teammate, we created a mission statement.
Mm.
And this is something I do with all my teams now. But this one really helped. We all got together and we created our own mission statement. What do we want to get out of this row? Like, we can assume that it's a world record, but we shouldn't. Like, we should make sure that everybody says the same stuff. And so everyone came together with their separate mission statement. We're doing this all on Zoom, right? Every week we'd get together for a big team call, and we started working on our mission statement. And for weeks, the call was around creating one combined mission statement, a sentence or two that was going to clearly define what we all agree is what we are going to do on the Pacific Row. And it got heated at times, we talk about this and we change these words and we argue about this, but it was all really, really productive. I mean, it wasn't bad heated. It was good. It showed that people cared, and we weren't willing to concede to agree to something that we didn't actually feel we wanted to do out there.
Mm.
And so our mission statement, I'm paraphrasing right now because I don't have it in front of me, was eventually to row from San Francisco to Hawaii as hard as we could as efficiently as we could and as fast as we could, so that when we got to Hawaii, we felt as a team that we had done everything that we could in our power to row as fast and to finish as quickly as possible. That was it. We created a list of traits that we wanted to embody out there, things like empathy, trust, communication, and we signed this thing. Once we did that, we printed them on 2 big decals, and they were stuck on each inside of each cabin of our boat so that you stared at it every time.
Yeah.
Now, this is not new stuff. People say, "Yeah, we've done this all the time. What's new?" I'll tell you. I'll show you how it applied. We're out there. We're about halfway. The first half of the row, first 2 weeks are miserable. Cold, rainy, windy, waves coming out from the side, and classic that coming out of California, everything wants to push you towards Mexico, not towards Hawaii.
Mhm.
It takes a while for the wind and the waves and the wind and the current to start pushing you towards Hawaii. So the first 2 weeks, we're fighting this push, and we're trying to make as much westward progress. But then you get to a certain point. For us, it was about halfway, where all of a sudden things start to fill in. But before they filled in for us, it became a high pressure system that meant that all of a sudden the ocean flattened out. There was absolutely no waves. There was absolutely no wind. It was hot as Hades.
Mm.
And we actually had a small current going against us. So it was like we were rowing up a river. And for 2 days, we're stuck in this and we're miserable, just sweating. And just your 2-hour shift was awful. And then you get into these tiny cabins and you're just in a
Oh,
sauna.
yeah.
And we're spirits are low. We're maybe we can break a world record here. We're doing all right, but if we're staying in stuff like this, just like in the last row, you can't stand this stuff much longer. You're really losing your grip on world records at this point. And so I'm rowing. And it's midday of our second day like this. It's just hot, and Angus comes out of the cabin. He's high. He just kind of throws that door open. He says, "And this is my boy. This is my brother in adventure. This is the guy that I just broke a world record with a few years back. You just heard about that. We trekked in the desert in Africa together. We rode from mainland Spain to the Balearics together. We do everything together." But he comes out and he's sure as shit not thinking about those things right now. He says, "We need to anchor." He just says it. He's flat out. "We need to anchor." He says, "We're barely rowing a knot right now, and we can't sustain this. If we anchor, even with the current, if we drift back 0.5 knots an hour, even if we rest for 6 hours, we'll only have drifted back 3 miles."
Mm. Mm.
And he says, "And we need the rest. We need it." And 6 hours strung along as rest is like unheard of. So he's saying, we need the rest. Who cares if we drift back a little bit? Well, I counter and I say, I disagree. I think we should push through. I said, I think we should push through this, because even if we can only row a half a knot for the next 6 hours, we'll have made up 3 miles.
Mm.
And that's a 6-mile
A 6-mile
swing.
swing. Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's a difference. But then I also said, and also if we can push through this depressed period and we come through the other end and we didn't quit and we didn't stop, we'll have that confidence moving forward for the next thing that hits us, and it will. And I remember him saying, and I understand where he's coming from. He says, "I don't give a shit about the emotion right now." He was pissed. He's like, "We anchor. It's the right thing to do." So you bring it to the team, right? And everybody has to talk about it. And at the end of talk, it's split decision.
Oh,
2 of us, myself and Duncan, want to keep rowing, and Angus and Jordan want to anchor. And by the way, they don't want to anchor because they're not tough enough. That's
yeah.
not what this
No.
is
It's
about.
a calculated
It's
purpose.
a calculated decision. Let's get some rest. And ours is calculated as well. Duncan and I are saying, hey, we're calculating, but we're valuing the result differently. And so the rules state that the tie goes to the skipper, which is me, meaning if there is a split decision, I make the final decision. That's it. And I know that no matter what I say, I'm going to piss half this team off, and it's not a fun decision. It's very emotional at this point, and people say, "Oh, there's no emotion in this decision." That's bullshit. There is, absolutely. And there's emotion in this one, because I know that if I say we're going to continue rowing, Angus can be like, "Jay, I do what you say, and I'm asking you for this right now," and I would have felt that, and then I would have lost their confidence, and we're only halfway through this row. So instead of making an emotional decision that would have made half the team angry, I looked at the cabin door was just open enough where I could see the mission statement. I thought to myself, you know what? That's what we do. And I made the decision based on what directly supports the mission statement. And for this, the decision to keep rowing supported the mission statement because it was to row as hard as we could, as fast as we could, so that when we got to Hawaii, we knew that we had gone as quickly as possible.
Love it.
As long as we can make forward progress, the decision to row is the right decision. Now, it's still going to piss them off, but they signed that.
Mm-hmm.
We committed to it, and it makes sense. So now it's a data-driven decision instead of an emotional one. Had we slowed down 0.5 knots and had not been able to make any progress, then Angus's choice would have been the correct decision because that would have been stopping backward progress. So it's only a half a knot difference between whether it was my decision was the right one or Angus's was the right one. But in this particular instance, mine was right. I called it. I made the decision. I referenced it, and we had grumbles, but nobody said anything because they realized that's exactly
Right.
what
And you
should be
gave
done.
them that why, which is so important these days. Long gone are they like because I said so. Tenets of leadership. Like it's been dead for a
Yeah,
few decades now.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean that type of like you know that kind of stick type of mentality
Yeah. I'm the
is not
captain. I
sustainable.
get, I
Yeah,
get 51% of the vote. Yeah, that
yeah,
goes over
yeah,
really well.
exactly.
So it's awesome to be able to parlay that you guys put all that hard work into your principles, values, into that mission statement as well. So I suspect they kind of went little head nod, little
Yeah, and,
hesitation,
you
like,
know, and by the way, we've got 2 military guys on board.
yeah,
Jordan and Duncan are both, Jordan was former Royal Marine, and, um, and Duncan was Army Corps of
yeah,
Engineers. So, this is not new to them. This is not this idea was, and that's why I do so well with military teammates is this is not the first time they've heard of this type of leadership. Doesn't mean that they haven't seen dysfunctional leadership as well.
sure.
Doesn't mean that I'm not a dysfunctional leader at times, but this is not this is not like a Greg in the first row where it was like, I don't even understand what being part of a bigger team is all about. These guys knew. So that was nice. And of course, Angus did because we went through so many special things together.
Yeah,
So,
incredible. And so, yeah, 9 days, right? You broke that record by 9 days.
yeah. And yeah.
Since what was your emotion like at the conclusion? Now you've got world records on both of those major rows. Did you feel fulfilled at that point, or were you already like, okay, what's next?
Both, both. I do say, and if we're going to kind of try to wrap this up, because I do want to make sure that we kind of talk about the nice little gems at the end here.
Yeah,
Um, I think I thought to myself, if I can do the Pacific in the way that I want to do it, and we have the success that we did end up having, that I think I will be fulfilled in terms of oceans. I don't think there's much left for me out there. I really do feel that. I'm 5 months out from it, and I still feel that way. But I'm not done with adventure rowing. For the last couple of years, I've also had my sights set on maybe trying to conquer some of the world's biggest rivers. And so I'm starting to think about those types of things, being a little bit more navigational, more exploratory in some of the things that I do. But I don't think I'm ever going to leave this idea of building great teams to take on audacious, seemingly
yeah,
impossible goals. I mean, that is the common thread that's going to be pulled through everything I do.
yeah. I love that. Yeah, I have a friend that he does an annual event, and his are mostly informal. He'll typically raise money for one of the special operations funds or something like that. But every year he just wants to hit his reset button, and he does it. Like one year, he's like, "Okay, I'm going to bike from Maine to Florida." Really no plan at all, like just sort of like carved out and then just went and executed. And, he
Yeah.
ran from Fort Bragg to Virginia Beach wearing his combat equipment, like he's an ultra
Wow.
veteran running, like, and but he does these things by himself. And to the point where like he had people like, hey, while you're doing this ride, I'd like to come out and support you. And he's like, nope, this is all just me. This is me, my gut check. So I can hit my reset button, do something really challenging every year so that I can sort of humble myself and then kind of
Wow.
move on with purpose. It's really remarkable. I'm not
That's
that
awesome.
I'm not that committed to punching myself in the face anymore, but I still do take on some challenges here and there. But doing it with a team, that's what gets it for me too, and You never get there alone. Even if it's a solo event, there's still a whole team of people getting you across that line and doing everything. Um, and yeah, so are there any other gems that you want to share from them? And I really want to kind of talk about that corporate experience, like what your clients that go through your platforms, kind of their takeaways and experience, and how you're able to really weave in this experience and stories and those nuances of the leadership potentialities that are out there for elite performing teams.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if I was to leave, I think one of the common things that I kept wanting to say on this interview, and I haven't said it yet, so I'll just say it now, is that, and I think that this really resonates with a lot of people that that we're kind of in the world that we're in right now. Is we hear this cliche that it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up. And I find this to be a very unproductive cliche. At the very least, it's incomplete.
Mhm.
And we nobody cares anymore. That's the reality. Nobody cares anymore how many times you get back up. I mean, we do live in a world right now where we're celebrating this idea that, hey, as long as you just keep on trying, and for people that are in for profit and we're trying to do great things, it's just not enough.
No.
And I mean, little league coaches are going to hate me for saying that, but that's the reality. There's too much talent in this world right now for you to just simply say that, hey, I tried my best.
Mhm.
We have to spend some time, which is hopefully what you heard over this very long interview, talking about our failures, being comfortable, discussing it, digging into it, owning things. And so that when we do get back up, we're a tougher, harder, smarter target to knock down. I mean, it's not, if we're not learning anything, we're just simply getting back up and dusting ourselves off. We were just a glutton for punishment and a glutton for mediocrity. And I think what this world needs, and if you want to know, maybe a secret to some of my success is I spend a majority of my time analyzing my failures,
Mhm.
talking about it to friends, to family, to strangers, on interviews, writing them in my books. Like these two books I've written, they're chock full of that stuff. It's all about failure. And you can put, as one of the guys I work with, a professor, John Danner at Princeton, called, he says, putting failure to work. Put it to work. And I think
Yeah.
it's a great phrase, because you can put it to work, and you should put it to work. So that's what I'd leave everybody with.
No, I think that's great because you're exactly right. Like that whole idea of like resiliency is you just not quitting, and you address it early in the book, those sort of what is productive quitting. Um, you know, repeating the same act again and having the same outcome is like it's pathetic. Like that was the word that comes to mind, is like, I don't need to hear your stories of how resilient you are, unless there's a growth that happened on the backside of that failure. Otherwise, I'm just listening to somebody tell a pathetic story, to just totally be blunt. It's no,
Yeah.
we like the compelling stories of resiliency when you can understand the growth that happens on the backside of it. And that potentiality would have never happened if that person hadn't failed, recognized, took on board those things they need to change so it doesn't happen again and they're better prepared. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's probably said even better than I could have said it. So, I mean, I just think that there has to be this um, there has to be this idea that when I get back up, there is I am a different person. Tom and I are different people than we were when we pushed off. We say that all the time. Angus and I talk about us being different people. We gave ourselves, all of ourselves, to this thing, and we're different. Failure, success, it doesn't matter. We're changed, and I think that also scares people, is that to make big leaps, to grow, you have to also change. You have to be a different person eventually. Love changes us. We talk about that. So that scares people, which is why they're afraid to fall in love, because I'm afraid to be a different person. And that's, but that, then you will be what you are, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But
Do you have a few more minutes to talk about sort of the experiential stuff that you guys are doing at Lat 35 and what your clients have experienced and what they can expect to experience if they were to take on board one of your events?
yeah, absolutely. So Lab 35 leadership does a number of different things, and obviously supported by all these stories that we just told you. We bring this experience and all this stuff that we've been talking about to our programs. But um, our kind of our capstone programs, our experiential programs, where we kind of dive people into these indelible kind of tactile experiences. Our popular ones being our rowing program for obvious reasons, and the military program that we do with Victory Strategies. So we do these things where we spend half the time, or we'll take you out in a boat, or we're going to do a type of SEAL type of training, and you're going to have this tactile. You're going to be working in teams. You're going to be challenged with us as coaches if you're in a boat to not only row but to row better, to get faster. But then the other half of that time is going to be in the classroom with a really academic kind of unpacking of those lessons. Really, it's just being used as a metaphor. That's what we just did today. I mean, it's a perfect example. We just unpacked my stories, and in the end, like, it could have been Jason rowing in a boat, or it could have been anything, though. I mean, these stories will transcend, the lessons will transcend the stories. And that's what we do in our programs. We'll spend half the time in the water, but half the time in the classroom, and really talking about it with a lot of debriefs, and a lot of kind of the Socratic method of just creating an environment for people to teach.
Now, when you've done this in the past, excuse me, oftentimes in these experiential events, you have a mixed audience, at least in my experience. You've got the people that are super eager to be there and they're pumped at this opportunity. And then you have the people that are, I'll just say, they're fearful of the unknown. Like, so when you're in, with Lat 35, a boat experience, like, I can imagine people are like, you must get all of it from like, oh my God, I'm going to fall in the water. This is scary. I'm very uncomfortable. I've never done anything like this, to what is the point of me learning how to row over the next couple of days, and versus how that's going to make me a better business person or a better, leader in my organization or whatnot. So how do you kind of get that buy-in in that mixed group? Because every time I've done one of these things, it's always a mixed group. It's not everybody's on the same page.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So those are the two people that are least interested in being there. The one are the people that are scared. I don't, maybe I don't know how to swim, or I'm not comfortable around water. Those ones, we can allay those fears quite quickly. We have all the safety precautions put into place. We have the coaches coaching from a motorized boat. We have experienced rowers in your boat with you for safety. We don't just throw you right in the boat. We're slowly getting in. We teach you how to row on the rowing machines. And of course, if anybody feels that they just absolutely do not want to be a part of it, they can do a coaching role where they'll be in the motorized boat with me. So they'll be very safe on there, and they're not any less part of the team, but now they've got a coaching role.
Right.
So we've got a lot of contingencies for people, because the worst thing that we could do is have somebody so scared of what they're doing that they're not open to learning these lessons and having this extremely exciting experience. So that's one thing, and we've had plenty of those people come in. And because we do these globally, we work with entire groups that don't know how to swim and still choose to do the rowing program, and it works out great. The other one, the eye roller, as I like to call them,
Yeah.
comes off that thinking like, this is a waste of time. These guys are going to blow sunshine up, out my pants and this kind of thing. And this is, I'm an old dog, and this is not how they do it. And I don't believe in this stuff. Those guys, those men and women, we've had them both, have come in, and I see them. You can almost, I'm sure you can too, Bob. Like,
Body
you can see
language.
him
Yeah.
from a mile away. You're like, here he is. This is my challenge for the day. And I love it. And I take it as such. And it is a challenge. And there's two things that we can overcome that challenge. The first one is peer pressure. And most people want to be there, and most people believe in this stuff. And obviously their organization and their boss or their leaders is putting in a decent amount of money and a lot of time, which arguably is even more expensive, to have their group here that could be off making money for the company now here. So most people buy into that. And when we divide up everyone into their crews, into their teams, you will know you'll be isolated right away, because of the enthusiasm of your team to get in and to get into that first exercise and get onto the rowing machines and to be on that boat. It's going to be, if you're not being pulled in a positive way and saying, God, maybe this is cool, you're definitely going to get pulled in a way that you're saying, like, if I don't join, like, now everyone's looking at me kind of sideways,
Yeah.
we use that, and that's a great way to do it, because that's no different than any teams you're on. Like, if somebody doesn't want to feel part of something, then the team can make them want to feel part of something, or it's going to be very uncomfortable. The other thing is, we're very academic. There is no denying once we get off the water, and we'll, on a full day session, you'll be on the water twice with debriefs, like I said, and storytelling. There is no denying that we're creating an incredible connection,
Mm.
and that people have a lot to say. And a lot of these people, they do have something to say. They just don't think they're going to get the platform to say it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this gentleman who came off the boat or off the bus, I'm going to give him a platform that day, and I'm going to give him a platform to either agree with us or to disagree with us. But either way, he is going to be able to challenge me, and myself and the rest of the group there are going to be able to challenge him right back. And that is all learning.
Yeah.
Even if he gets back on the bus being like, yeah, whatever, man, that's not my thing. Like, whatever. I'll tell you what, he learned something, and he doesn't want to admit it to us. That's fine. But I would say that most every time, even with those people that come off the bus rolling their eyes, they leave usually shaking my hand, saying, to be fair, you probably didn't notice, which I did, but I didn't want to be here, and I really got a lot out of this, and thank you so much. And that's what we're all about here.
Yeah,
So
and it's not just a selfish plug because we work together on these, endeavors, especially now that we've created this military partnership, the victory strategies with Lat 35. But we happen to have a client at Victory Strategies who we're fortunate to have that I met earlier in my career while I was in the SEAL team. So I've known this company I've had a relationship with this company going on 11 plus years. And they believe in the experiential events, and they've done a number of them, you know, before having re-engaging with Victory Strategies. And they talk about one of them was an event that I head up for them in 2010. And everyone that had participated in that event still refers to that event as being life changing for them and the company, how they viewed the company, the relationship with the company. And it has actually built some defaults in there, and it's not just the one that they did with me. They continue to build on it because they believe on that process and how it gels their company together, how it supports their mission and purpose, and their camaraderie. And man, isn't that just fulfilling? Because you've been in this game for about 15 years now,
yeah,
and since I've just retired in 2019, it's kind of a new space for me. But so I'm so appreciative that I've at least got this experience with this one client that I've had this longer term relationship with, that I know that it wasn't just me that impacted him, but that whole process has impacted and changed that company over the long term. And when they get on the bus, like you said, they might not even know it. They might not have the epiphany for a couple of weeks, and somebody's going to be maybe telling a story about what they did on the water, and all of a sudden be like, oh, you know what? Now I get that connection even further. So yeah, it's great medicine. And like you said, for some clients, it's tough for them to buy off on taking that much time away from work because they see it's just impacting the bottom line. But you and I know, and the studies show that the return on investment on those things is 10x at least just
yeah.
in the first year. You know,
Oh yeah, 100. I mean, us selling a soft skill like leadership development and building and maintaining high performance teams. You know, I'd say 10 years ago was a tougher sell. It's an easier sell now, but still, what your goal is what you just said, to have the learnings of the day transcend the day itself. So if people are referring it back to it a week from now, a week from a month, a year, a career afterwards, that's life changing stuff, and that's great. And we do assessments as well for people both pre and post. And the post assessment focuses around how people are changing their mindset and the way that they're leading teams as a direct result of their work with us. And so, we're also finding great ways to measure the impact and really kind of measure that ROI, for as a result of our program. So that's very
it
important.
is, and
And that's
and one of the things I've been able to witness over the last couple of years is like the leadership development. If we give just like one, increase in an attribute, is self confidence. Like we're a sounding board. We're somebody from outside the organization that's building up these leaders in an organization where they now feel more empowered to be confident in their space because they've just kind of checked the box on something that they would have never done before. And that's huge. I mean, we all know as
that
leaders,
is
like having that extra self confidence, kind of everybody can see it, they can sense it.
Yeah, that confidence comes from the fact that most people are thrust into leadership positions. They're
Mhm.
not trained properly, and then they are so busy as a result of this promotion and all the extra work that they have to do that they've actually never honed their skills. They've never actually had to take a day or two where they're like, "You don't have to worry about anything except for learning right now. Soak some stuff up." And I think that that's what leaves people with in our programs. So grateful is the opportunity to just learn. And That's, I think, what happens is we all, every company likes to say that they've got some great internal training programs, and there's a lot of good ones out there. But in the end, when business comes a knocking, those things are usually the first to be shed, and unfortunately, they probably should be the last. So.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, Jason, so thank you so much for spending all this time with us.
Great,
Those
it's
stories are
awesome.
amazing. Really, I mean, just some amazing takeaways in there. This podcast will be circulated for years to come. I really appreciate
Love
that.
it.
And so, you've got the documentary that's going to be released sometime early in 2022, and we'll share on this on the show notes. Even when I can update them even later on when that gets released, so that'll be in there too. You've got your two books that I'll have in the show notes for everybody to refer to as well. If people were going to follow you or get in touch with you, what's your preferred method?
Following me at Instagram's a great place at Jason_T_Caldwell. Just search Jason Caldwell, you'll find me. That's in terms of pictures and visuals, it's great to see all of the adventures that I'm doing. LinkedIn is also something, from the business side, just Jason Caldwell, and find me on LinkedIn and Lap 35, and always happy to answer questions or to have conversations around the leadership and team building implications of these things that we've been talking about today. So feel free. I hope this isn't the last time that people hear my voice.
Yeah, no way. You'll be back for sure. And just a shout out to your social media team when you guys did the Pacific race, because that was the first event that I was able to follow you guys live. They did a tremendous job.
They did do a
Really
good job.
engaging content. I have friends that knew nothing about the race, but because they follow me, were like, "Oh my gosh, this is like unbelievable!" And they
Yeah.
were really shaping it out. They were building energy, and you might not have been able to feel it, but you had thousands and thousands of people cheering you on throughout that, which was
Yeah.
and you were doing
Yeah.
it
No.
while we were doing the race across America. So I was like updating my team. I was like, "Hey, you guys are suffering right now. Look at the conditions these dudes
Look at
are
this
in
guy.
right now." Like, there's like a photo of your hands look like just calves,
Oh, yeah.
extended calves. Like, yeah, you've
My
got saddle sores right now. Look at Jason's hands. Yeah,
God. Gosh.
so cool.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, yeah,
Well,
this won't be the last time we'll have you on again, and I look forward to working with you in 2022, my friend.
likewise, Bob. Looking forward to hanging out with Victory Strategy Team. So
Yeah, all right, be safe, and until then, we'll see you on the other side of the microphone, everybody.